Are you a brewhead? I'm a brewhead. Are you a brewhead? I'm a brewhead. Y'all are brewheads? Yeah, we brewheads. So pour a glass of craft beer, we can do this. Yeah.
What's good, y'all? This is C-Certified Brewhead, and welcome to episode 143 of Beer and Others, the podcast Adjunct series. Just me this evening, no Nathaniel, but we have a great one, guys. So one thing that's been happening lately is every time I speak to someone from the beer industry, inevitably we end up talking about the state of craft beer, the state of the industry, the future of craft beer. And I'm finding it pretty fascinating myself. And my good friend Kevin Abbott from Barrel of Monks Brewing, who's been on the pod 3 times. You guys might know the name if you're a long-time listener or watcher. And he reached out to me recently. He's like, hey, I got someone you might want to meet. And told me the story. I won't get too much into it right now because that's what this next few hours is going to be about. And immediately I was like, oh, this is definitely something that I want to talk about and a guy that I want to have on the pod. So tonight we're going to be talking about essentially how not to start a craft brewery and, the ins and outs of that, not necessarily in a pessimistic way, but, we do need to be honest about the state of, the economy, the world, everything right now. And I think it's an important conversation to have. And there's, as you guys will learn during this, there's essentially nobody better to have that conversation with. So please welcome y'all, Kelly Meyer in the building. There we go. Welcome, you champion. Appreciate you.
I don't know if I can hang with that, man. That's a lot. But I appreciate you having me.
Oh, it's an honor and a pleasure. I'm very excited for this one, man. I'm really glad we connected. We had a great chat last week and just talked about what we could talk about, and obviously it was an immediate, easy, bunch of things we want to discuss. We're gonna get into everything that you do, but I guess we do have to preface this. So the quick version, which you're gonna go into, you're in Texas. You were a brewery owner. You are now not a brewery owner, but you are a podcaster and author. And the podcast is called How Not to Start a Brewery. And is that correct?
How Not to Start a Damn Brewery, but yes.
A Damn Brewery. I knew there was one word I missed.
I had some emotion in there.
Yeah, I like that. Emphasis.
To let you know, I actually released there was a book originally, and the book was originally called, because I was more angry then, How Not to Start a Fucking Brewery.
Gotcha.
And Amazon would let me print it, but they wouldn't let me market it. And so I changed the name in the second edition and started the brewery with that. So
that's smart.
Damn got me more money, which is we can get into that later. It was a very challenging decision for me to make, but I did.
Well, we had the same problem because it's beer and other shit, and you're not allowed to say that in the title of a podcast. So you probably would have had the same issue if you launched the podcast with fucking it, because it wouldn't have worked. So we had to put SHHH, or we had to put something. And even when we tried to, we own the trademark now to BAOS podcast in Canada, and they wouldn't let us trademark beer and other shit because you're not allowed to trademark cuss words in Canada, but you can in the States. So I could trademark it there. It's a whole thing, and I guess we have another commonality in that. So we're going to go so much deeper into that. But what we decided to do was let's choose beers tonight. We both curated our own list of beers and I actually don't know what yours are, which is great because I'm excited to just see it as it comes. But we chose beers that were sort of relevant to the conversation. Essentially, either breweries whose models we like, or something we want to talk about that brewery in relation to the conversation this evening. So, guess first. Tell us what you have tonight, man, to start.
All right. Do you want me to go just one at a time, or you want the whole lineup?
Oh, no, one at a time. We're going to keep people waiting as we go.
Okay. So the first one is a very, very small production brewery called Yokefellow.
Okay.
And I brought this one on the show for 2 reasons. One, he makes light pale lagers, decoction mash, pilsners. So the beer is good. The beer is, that kind of stuff that we like to drink when we're drinking. But he has a very unique business model. And I think going forward, the type of thing people should emulate if they're planning on doing a small scale. And that's obviously a whole different piece of the pie. But if you're going under 1,000 barrels, it should be something like this, in my opinion.
Okay. And what is their business model?
So it's interesting. Basically, Garrett was the brewer at another brewery called Five Stones nearby, and decided to kind of start his side label, which, not in and of itself unique or different. There's a lot of people doing that. So the brewer has his own label, but ultimately he's contract brewing it there. he opened a tasting room in like the Texas Hill Country on it, kind of in the Texas wine region. Actually,
Okay.
his wife is in the wine side. She has her own wine label, doing the same thing in the wine world, and they open a tasting room that is the only place to purchase at retail, really, his beer, her wine. But they partner up with a guy who used to work at Jester King, who you've probably heard of, I would imagine.
Yes, I have. Yes.
And actually, Garrett used to work at Jester King, and so did Adrian at one point. So that maybe some of the uniqueness of the business model comes from this. But Matt, and I believe his wife, opened in that tasting room. It's called Nice and Easy. It has its own cocktail list. It has food. And then it also is the tasting room for both the winery and the brewery. And I think makes a lot of sense overall from a profitability standpoint.
That's amazing. And I was going to say, from a consumer standpoint, like, this sounds like a place I want to go to. Particularly if you say
it's cool to hang out.
Yeah, man.
And they're great. So,
that's awesome, dude. Very interestingly, I think we kind of chose somewhat similarly. The first beer I chose this evening is a beer called Sklepnik from Godspeed in Toronto. Are you familiar with Godspeed by any chance?
I have absolutely heard of them. I don't know the detail. Either you mentioned them on the show or I listened to they were a guest. I can't remember now, but I think it was from you I'd heard of them.
Okay, so that's good then. Love them so much. The owner, Bim, is from Gatineau in Quebec, and he used to work at Judas Ciel, who you might be familiar with as well, who do famously Péché Mortel, their coffee stout, the best coffee stout in Canada. And he's got a very eclectic career. Started a brewery in Japan. His wife's Japanese. He's actually there right now. He's sort of splitting his time between Japan and Toronto. And he opened Godspeed in 2018 in Toronto, which was an interesting choice from a Quebec dude who sort of lived in Montreal and Gatineau and around the world. And essentially he got so much hype about him. And then he started the brewery with, I'm going to quickly take the photo, with like beers that he had hype, but the beers he was making were far from hype. And this was pre the kind of crispy wave. He started with like a Dortmunder, a pale ale, and a fucking something else, like a yuzu saison or something like that. Like something just was like, what are you doing? But essentially, over time, he has really cemented himself as like the crispy lord of Ontario. And this particular beer is their Pilsner Urquell kind of like homage, but it's aged in a 40 hectoliter pitch-lined barrel made for them and shipped across by the folks at Pilsner Urquell, which is incredible. And they're some of the best like lagers in the province for sure, in the country I would say as well. And they're kept it small, dedicated to the craft. One space to get it, do a little bit of distro, but nothing crazy. And it's just high quality, exceptional stuff all the time. Very classy, all short cans, which is a big thing for me. And it's just, they're my favorite. I love them. So it looks like we got two great ones to start with. Brother.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay.
God damn it. I love this shit. Okay. That was a fun way to start. So let's get into your story, man, because this is fascinating. So let's start from the beginning. Like, how did you get into beer? And then how did that lead to the brewery?
I got into the beer industry similarly to a lot of, unfortunately, similar to a lot of people, where I had a successful first career, successful exit, and was like, hey, I don't really want to have a job anymore. I want to have something that's cool and like fun. And at the time, I actually said out loud, I'm either going to do a winery, a distillery, or a brewery.
Okay.
And if you know much about Texas, in 2011, the Texas wine industry did not make juice worth getting involved in.
Right.
And the spirits, similarly, I'm mostly a Scotch whiskey fan. Really can't make that in Texas. And I was like, all right, fine, I'll do a brewery inspired by all of those things. And I pulled a lot of those into the brewery. So it was
That's cool.
2011, we incorporated, and in 2012 we opened.
Okay. And what was the brewery called?
I named it New Braunfels Brewing Company, which is the name of the city that we were in. And my wife was very disappointed. I came up with a whole bunch of names, and they were all, unique and interesting. And I decided instead to have the brewery name be something kind of almost like stoic and traditional in a way that, and so New Braunfels is a big tourist town for Texas. We're like the playground for everybody. Everyone comes on the weekend. So come to town, drink the beer, take it home, buy it at the store, right? That was the idea. Didn't really work, but that's a later part of the story. But so anyway, it's kind of boring name. And then the beer names I was just going to go crazy with. And that's basically what I did. So I don't know if that was the right choice, but that was my choice.
Okay. And the town, like so I can get the idea. You were saying it was between Austin and San Antonio. Is that right?
Yeah, I think what I might have told you is that if you fly into Austin and rent a car,
Mm.
you'll drive south, and right about when you notice that it's not sucking anymore, that's us. So
Okay, that's what you
you'll
said.
find us.
Yes. And why is it a tourist town? Like, what's the vibe?
Two rivers, and so it's the shortest river they
On
say in
Google.
the world, but definitely in Texas.
Okay.
Very clear, always 72, spring fed, and then a big river comes through town, and then
Oh.
many people have heard of Schlitterbahn, one of the largest water parks in the world,
Okay.
and that's located here too. It's literally acres of the town is all this big ass water park.
Oh, there you go, straight away. High feces level in the Cornell River. That's the first thing I see. That's a very pretty town. I'd probably encourage people to Google it. Okay, I see what's up then. So, when you started the brewery, what did you aim? I mean, it sounds like, I mean, you said you were inspired by wine and spirits and stuff, but what did you like when you actually made the beers? Did you like, all right, I'm going to make barrel aged stouts in whiskey barrels, or like, what was your kind of like intention and what did you launch with?
No, so it's kind of the opposite, and I think you ran into a lot of this in 11 and 12 and even 10, where the we were all inspired by the old school beers from Belgium and stuff that had been from Bavaria for 100 fucking years, and
Mm,
the labels, the names, the pedigree, and so I think a lot of us struggle with that, where we need to make these six different core styles and whatever. So I did decide to be a little bit weird, and because I had wine influence, I wanted to be eventually grow my own grains, malt my own stuff on a small scale, and play with that. And so I researched what grew well grain wise in the city we're in, and in our county, really just wheat.
okay.
And so I opened with wheat beers was the idea, and everything was 85% wheat because at least in the United States, the way the wine thing works is you have to have 85% of the grapes from a certain region to claim that, at least on a statewide scale. It
Gotcha.
gets tighter and tighter the more you go down, but that was the idea. So 85% wheat, Hefeweizen, Dunkelweizen, Weizenbach, Berliner Weiss, that kind of thing. So,
Okay. And did that include like lagers and pilsners and all that stuff?
no, I knew very early on that that was a terrible idea, and that if I decided to make lagers and pilsners, that I would have gone out of business, and it
What
would have happened much faster.
is that because maybe back then it wasn't what it is now as far as the popularity?
Well, two things. One, you're trying to pull people out. Yeah, back then we were trying to pull people out from like the Budweisers, and this is interesting, which we are going to get to in a minute. But there's no way to make a beer in a small scale without a lot of education and experience and equipment to make that style of beer well enough to get the Modelo drinker to go like, oh, this is actually really good too.
Gotcha.
Most of the time they're like, this sucks, too much flavor. Like, so to make a light lager as a guy who didn't have experience would not, it would have been some of the worst light lager you'd ever had.
Gotcha. That makes sense. What did you ever get to it, or you just didn't even get there with Krispies?
No, so I ended up switching. Being in the shadow of Jester King helped a lot too. Being a guy who was a wine and spirits enthusiast, I played a lot with wine
Mm,
hybrids too. And when I
okay.
heard what they were doing, I was like, "Ooh, I'm gonna try some of that too." And so it slowly happened. But in 2017, after 5 years of being open, we switched to mixed culture exclusively.
Really? And how did that
Mhm.
go down?
At the time was fantastic, but in States anyways, mixed culture started dying right about that time, and really in a way the whole industry really kind of contracted, and that we got too many breweries and it was more crowded. So my idea was we would stand out, and there really weren't that many breweries nationally that were known for that. And we had a different perspective, a different flavor profile, obviously a different artistic methodology than Jester King did, a lot of the other guys. But it didn't really work, and that market just. I've interviewed other breweries that same problem. Like right about that time to 2019 is when it just evaporated, and it's just
Mm,
gotten worse.
that happened here too. There's like in Quebec, it's a different story because I don't know how familiar you are, but in Quebec, the it's very Belgian influence there, so there's a lot of mixed ferm, a lot of barrel aged stuff. In Ontario, we have a few, and there's a few breweries. When I say a few, literally like 3 to 5 that do them kind of regularly. Out of like 450 here, I think. Like it's very few and far between, or maybe occasionally a brewery would do a one-off release or something like that. Like one of the ones I'm going to have tonight is from a brewery I didn't even know that did that style, to be honest. I just, because they closed down, that's why I had it. But yeah, so it sounds like everyone is doing it, and I feel like the ones that were known for it, like Jester King, like probably Rare Barrel and fucking what's the one, Cascade, and like all those type of cats. There's one called Orval out in deep Quebec as well. That's like the Hill Farmstead as well, but they're like the hill of Quebec that are like hard to get, super exclusive stuff. Aside from that, yeah, Mixed Firm wasn't popping. I never put a year on it though, as far as when it died. Obviously, you would know that pretty intimately. But that's interesting. You said 2017, eh? Is when it started to go downhill.
Yeah, literally the time that we switched. And so it was trying to push that through, and it was everywhere. It was retailers, especially in Texas and really all over the country, because we distributed to 7 states at one time. But in Texas, they were just ripping bombers out, like, and just bleeding the shelves. You could go into a grocery store one week and there'd be a door of them, and you go in the next week and there's like one row of bombers, and then they were just like, yeah, we're not ordering anymore. They just and they're gone.
So is it the packaging, or is it just the interest in the style has gone?
It's a mix of both. I know there were some breweries that were going to experiment with cans, and as far as sour beer in cans, and on a large scale, I never really saw it. So I don't know if anyone had success with it. But I also, the price points wouldn't work. So
yeah,
they're
not cheap.
And again, since you're here, I use Jester King's example a lot just because they're numbers. But you take a look at like what their price per ounce was, and Cascade's a great example. The price per ounce they sold those bombers for, the 750s. If they were to go into cans, you're talking about like a $30 6-pack. It's not going to move. There's no volume, so it wouldn't have helped. The price points didn't work.
Right. So even regardless of the packaging format, they were kind of fucked either way. With that style.
I think that one of the things that I have done is made it my life's mission over the past 3 years to figure out what the hell went wrong. Right. I can't tell you unequivocally, but I can tell you that pricing point with mixed culture beer, that's an issue. The education piece is an issue. The art is an issue. And I wish that wasn't the case. It literally makes me angry to have said that, but so many brewery hoppers and beer drinkers just got really goddamn tired of having to be explained what it was and like how to pronounce the beer name correctly. They're kind of over it. And I'll admit, maybe I am too. But
in with regard to Mixed Firm or just in general?
I'm talking about Mixed Firm specifically, and those kinds of beers tend to be more artistic, definitely European oriented, and so it's a learning curve for the Dos Equis drinker to walk in and be like, what is this? Why does this taste like this? Like, right. At some point, they just got tired of being educated about it. Like, that's what we experienced in our tasting room.
Okay. No problem. That's interesting. I mean, I guess when you think about it, there is a lot of explanation going into those beers, and I feel like the average kind of beer drinker doesn't really participate in Mixed Firm beers. And I wonder if it's like exposure. Like if a lot of people tried it, because sometimes, like you were saying, you're very influenced by a lot of wine stuff and doing some hybrids. Like it would go to, you would assume that a lot of wine drinkers would enjoy it, but I don't know if you have any insight into why do you think beer drinkers typically, or just drinkers, I'm sorry, in general, weren't exposed enough to styles like that that a lot of people would very probably enjoy?
Well, so we had with that tasting room, that was a big part of what we did. We was a tourist town, so we would get people coming in all the time, tubing the river all day. They've had light lagers, and they're just coming in and they want to keep the party going. It's not so much a flavor experience. It's just Google brewery down the street. Let's check it out.
Gotcha.
And we'd have that conversation a lot. And I'll use the example of women, although it wasn't just that, but like there were a lot of women who would come in and just be like, I don't really like beer. And when I talked to them about like, well, we have this one that was aged in Viognier barrels and then re-fermented with the grapes. And they're like, oh, this is good. I would drink this. But what they didn't do is buy any to take home, and they sure shit didn't come back and buy it again. Fun experience, interesting, maybe even Instagrammed it, told their friends, but it wasn't something you can build a business on. And that ultimately is the whole point.
Why do you think that is?
It's just basically what they're comfortable with. And so there comes a point where, like I try bourbon all the time, and I'll go out and try different bourbons, different whiskeys. But if I go to the store, I'm usually going to buy an Angel's Envy or a Michter's. At the end of the day, I'd love to tell you it's not that way, but everybody kind of has their favorites and their place they play in. And it's not – people like us like to explore new things. People like the people that we're friends with love to talk about this new thing they had that we haven't tried and we should have it. But we are a niche within a niche within a niche. And the average beer, wine, or spirits drinker, they just want to have a drink in front of them that will get them buzzed enough to enjoy the conversation with the person they're hanging out with. And
Gotcha.
that sucks, but I have seen that play out over and over the more I've been around. So
Yeah,
that's
man.
my opinion.
Do you know what? I actually agree. I typically wouldn't have agreed maybe in the past few years, but recently I've noticed even my like people, guys like us, like full beer nerds that are either involved in beer media or in the beer industry or whatever, have started to like buy cases of shit. Like I mentioned that Cachet Mortel, the coffee stout. One of my good friends in Quebec is one of the predominant beer writers out there, and he just basically now he goes to his brewery down the street and he buys cases of Cachet, and that's basically it as far as he's told me. So like I've noticed, and that was just one example of many different people who I find that are now like, and particularly I think, you know, in this economy and post COVID when everyone maybe spent too much, got a little fat, like, oh fuck, I need to chill. They don't really have the funds always to roll the dice on that new, you know, fun looking beer, when they could be like, it could be good, it could be amazing, but it could be kind of weak, and then I could have just spent less money on this beer that I know is going to be great and then just roll with it for that same sort of reason you were saying. They'd just be like, well, at the end of the day, I'm drinking to enjoy the flavor, but, you know, I kind of want to get a bit lit. So it's something I'm seeing more often as well. And I notice even my girlfriend, who has a wine and spirits and coffee Instagram account, we paired up with BAOS and used to travel pre-COVID with tourism offices and stuff. Even she's now found more wine, like a wine from, funnily enough, from California that we get here that she just loves and just buys half a dozen to a dozen bottles every time we go to the store. She'll just grab that, stock them up, because she's like, I don't have to think about it. It's like $20. It's great quality. You know, much as she'd rather support local, there's probably nothing as much that sort of, and she's been introducing more people to that, and it's not even a local thing, and that's something that's important to probably most drinkers. So I find that an interesting anecdote as well, that like it's happening all around. I think it's a strange phenomenon, but I guess it's just a sign of the times, maybe.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that there was an excitement there, and that, well, you know what, there definitely was. Like, we were all very excited about the new brewery, the new beer, the new release, the collaboration. And when you really get down to it, you know, you guys obviously have less breweries than us, but you have a lot still as well.
Yeah.
With 10,000 breweries in the United States, no one's making anything that different. Like, I mean, it's not, I want to say it's all boring, but at the same time, like, I still go on people's Instagram now, and I was actually looking up a bunch of them yesterday for a little project I was doing. And everyone's still, it's a picture of the Teku glass, it's the beer in the glass, it's new beer Thursday, come on down, we're open 5 days. It's the same goddamn post a thousand times. Why do I care about yours, right? It just got boring, I think, in a sense.
Yeah, it's definitely that. I mean, there's the cats who don't think it's boring. I guess the ticker untapped culture type of thing, which is, I don't know about you. I'm still into that for the most part. Like there's like this one year, like this Godspeed beer. Like last time I was there, I got a case. Not just of this one beer, but a whole bunch of stuff, like a couple of everything, because I think all their beers are phenomenal. And I just like having that there, so I don't even have to think about it. I start every beer session with a crispy, and whether it's new or not, I don't really care that much about lagers being new. Then when it comes to, say, haze, and that's probably my main thing, like I would prefer to drink new stuff from that. And if it's a stout or something, like, well, I guess most of the barrel-aged stuff and the fun big ones are typically one-offs. But yeah, like it's not, I guess it all sort of depends on the, you know, but then I follow people on Instagram, and I'm sure you do too, like, you know, in the community drinkers that are just, I know people in Quebec that go to, you know, from what it looks like, they go to Vermont like every weekend and they get every new beer from Foam, Burlington Beer Co, Hill Farmstead, you name it, you know, they're getting, and then they're doing trades. They're all drinking shit from the West Coast. So obviously they get those, there's this company called Kinek, Kinek, and they have these like, it's like a virtual post office box that businesses can do. So say, and they hold a package for you. So because we're here, you can't ship over the border. Well, you can. There's ways around it, but you know, what if you want to do it without the risk, you can ship it across the country to this business that's on, you know, in a border town, and then you pay. I think there's like, you know, every £5 is like you pay $10 for them to hold it or something like that. So like they do that. And they're always drinking beer from everywhere. So there's a lot of people, whilst there's some phenomenal stuff available locally, they're kind of obsessed with getting the new shit, and they pay out the asked to do that. Like, it's crazy how much they're paying. But I guess some people are into it, and that's what they want. So then they go for it and do it. There's so many different types of drinkers, I guess. It's kind of what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, there's billions of people on the planet. So the question is, how do you set yourself apart, and how do you create a business? Always that's my approach to the job that I have, is like, how do I unpack this in a way that I can tell somebody, look, do these 12 things, put this in your business plan, and I can guarantee success. Unfortunately, I don't feel like I can, but I would say that, like, maybe you guys are, well, and I would say it's, I guess, different. So in the United States, I know for a fact that Tabor is running bad. Like, they're just not getting a bunch of new stuff. They're definitely down as far as what's going, because people just don't want to spend $30 on a bottle like they used to.
Right.
There's still people that do, though. Like, I saw somebody post the other day, and I think that's more to the point that it's like when I walked into my grocery store 4 weeks ago and I saw a new rack out there with bombers on it. I realized I don't think I've seen that in a year. Same thing. Like, this guy posts his Tabor shipment, and I'm like, I can't remember the last time somebody porch bomb.
Yeah, it's less common. Definitely.
Yeah, so, and I miss it too. I mean, it changed the market in a way I think makes it less fun, makes it less exciting. And I'm not happy to be the guy reporting about it, but it definitely, again, I'm the guy trying to figure out how to unpack it more so than missing that it's gone, I guess. So.
Huh. I like that. That's good context for, I guess, people listening who sort of are learning about you tonight, like what you're doing. You're taking your real life experience and unpacking it, which we're going to get to shortly. So then, before we get to sort of something you said to me, by the way, I just want to say this, that you said on the call we had the other day, you were like, there's more you can learn from people's and other businesses' failures than you can learn from success. And I think that I told my girlfriend about this because I thought your whole concept of what you're doing is phenomenal. It's so cool, man. And that's really where you're coming from. So just to position that, like, like I was saying in the beginning, like, it's not pessimistic. It's literally taking the lessons from the failures and being like, how can we avoid that in future? Really is what you're doing. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, and that's evolved like most things in my life. When I first started the podcast, I was very angry. If you go back and listen to a lot of those, I don't think I went a single episode without calling somebody out that I thought needed to get a little bit of hate. But now, for the most part, those are out. And I realized that if I was going to continue to do the podcast, continue to have those conversations, for one, I wasn't interested in just going online and talking shit to people. I wanted it to be something better. And I started learning from the people that were interviewing with me, and like kind of seeing some people who were, more mature about it and weren't as angry. And I think it was sometime last year that I kind of reevaluated what I was doing and what the future of the podcast would be. And I decided that it could be a vehicle for good in a very important way. And I still think you've got to look at the bad. I still think we have to get some of that out. So when the Brewers Association says something asly stupid, I'm going to let people know that they did that. But ultimately, that's not my goal. My goal is to research what went wrong with these guys' breweries, ask them along the way, hey, when you signed that lease, could you have predicted that 5 years later that was going to be the reason you closed? And they're like, yeah, dude, here's what I should have done, and here's what you should do. And I think those are valuable lessons that, like you mentioned, I listened to lots of different podcasts and read a bunch of books throughout the years, and I learned a lot of ways to succeed. But you can't. There's a lot of ways to not find that path. Versus, it seems like the failure is so prevalent, and these things are so repeated that, like, there should be a list, and then that's what I consider my job, the list of the things everyone's doing that no one should.
I love that so much. And the thing that I compared it to, which had already beat me to it, was that I think it was a tribe of mentors from Tim Ferriss, who basically did the same thing but for success. And that's when you said that the failure is going to teach you more. And I think that's phenomenal. And I think it's much needed, and particularly in today's climate, really. So then, to get back to your story, because I want to wrap that side of it up so we can move on to the new part. So was there any part of the brewery, you owned it for 10 years, right?
Yep,
is that correct?
10-year sentence.
10 years. It's like
I got on good behavior.
Yeah. Was there any part where it was killing it, that was really going well?
Yeah, we definitely had some moments where it was great, and especially as we expanded outside the state, there were some wins. Like, it was cool to ship 10 grand worth of beer to California, Florida to reship beer. There were some months that it looked good. There were some months that there were some good opportunities. And it's funny you ask that because I was just texting one of my guests today, or he started the text. I was texting him back maybe 2 hours ago. And he was talking about how there were times that it looked amazing. There was profit on paper. And 90 days later, he gave it all back. And so it was such a roller coaster. And I had the same experience where you'd have these killer summers and then just it's almost like you had to pay for it. Like I live in Texas, like when we have a mild winter, we're like, oh geez, this summer's gonna suck. It's gonna be 120 degrees. It's almost like that in a sense where you knew that it wasn't gonna work. But there were some wins along the way for sure. But for the most part, they were short lived, I guess is a good way to say it.
Interesting. Okay, and it was essentially like that for the whole 10 years.
Unfortunately, it was. There was a lot of pivots, and so you see that a lot with different breweries today. Even that there's this whole new direction, or they're rebranding, restructuring, and every time you do that, you have essentially evaporate your existing revenue and profit, and you're investing in the future. And I had an argument with a guy. I don't know, it was an argument. It was a discussion. Who's an investor in a brewery. Yeah, he's an investor in a brewery in Dallas, who's probably the fourth or fifth largest producing brewer in Dallas. Mm-hmm. And he was saying, like, I don't understand when you say that we're not profitable. We just reinvest all of our profits. I'm like, right. Meaning you never took any out. Like sure, it's profitable on paper. You've got an EBITDA given to you by your accountant, and you can put that out to the investors and say, hey, we've got X profit. Our valuation is X plus 10, and you guys just made money on your investment. But if the brewery goes out of business in 4 years, there's no profit. Like ultimately, you just invested in disaster eventually.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Which is what we did.
Right. So then, how far into it did the signs start? I mean, obviously, you're saying it was a roller coaster the whole time, but at what point did you realize, like, oh, this is not happening, this is not going to work? Like, was it towards the end, or did you sort of have those epiphanies multiple times and then just kept trying, and then like what did that look like?
Okay, so here's the problem, and people are not going to like the statement, so take it or leave it. And I think actually Kevin and I talked about this because he worked at Funky Buddha, I don't know if you knew that, in Florida, and Funky Buddha opened, I'm going to butcher the dates, but let's say 2009. 3 years later, they expanded to a 30-barrel system. 3 years after that, they sold for $80 million. And that is the story that we all knew. So when 2011, when I opened, you read the books, Dogfish Guy, the Brooklyn Guys, and the basic story was you effectively burn cash and capital to get market share, to expand distribution. You don't make money for years, and then one day you get someone to buy you out, whether that's AB or a VC company or whatever, and that's when you get paid back that investment. Right. So in a sense, we didn't expect to make money the first year, the second year, the third year, the eighth year.
Right.
But we also were only comfortable continuing to invest so much. And so there came a point where my wife looked at me and she's like, no more. And then we gave one more round, and then it was no more. And then it was like, you need to decide. And so it just became more and more stressful as more and more money had to come in, because every one of those pivots had to be financed somehow, and it wasn't going to be with tasting room revenue. So.
Right. And did you have investors, or was it just your wife and yourself?
We never did. So we never took on investors, and we never had a bank loan, which is good and bad. We would have lost less of our personal money had we done that, but we would have gone out of business sooner. And who knows what would have happened to my life. I might have been doing something really boring instead of something cool and exciting like I am now. So.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's a positive way to look at it. So then was there like it sounds like you kind of maybe answered this already potentially with that last round of investment. Like, was there like a point where you were like, that's it? And was it that point, or was there like a different thing where you were like, all right, we're fucking just shutting down?
No. So it's basically that. It was kind of, like we sort of almost had this thing every spring where the conversation started again, because December and January, every distributor closes out their warehouse. So they order very, very little for the month of December, and they try to keep as little inventory on hand on 12/31. And so then sales are slow in January. Yeah, because everyone got too much alcohol, the Christmas season, now you're dry January, whatever the reason is. So they don't pick up. And then when they do pick up towards the end of January, you don't get paid for that until about the end of February. And that's usually a small order, then a bigger order. So somewhere between November and March is kind of a ghost town. And the year that it really, the fit hit the shan all the way was 2019.
Okay.
And it's kind of the same thing, but it happened earlier. And I know one of our big distributors in Dallas was trying to sell, and they were managing inventory very tightly for that reason, trying to keep the numbers on paper look good when they were going to the presentations, which we didn't know then. We found out later. But part of that was they didn't order, and my wife and I sat down actually my birthday's January 3rd. I swear to God, we sat down on my birthday. She's like, I don't want to do this today, but here's the deal. And she just shows me all the red. The account's essentially overdrawn. I didn't cash these checks, and so we're cool, blah, blah, blah. What are we going to do? And we made a plan. We met once a week. We were like, this is all we can do. And we made a decision that we were going to shut it down in 2019. But I was going to wait until the lease expired, which was the next year. And then at that point, we basically just run it down, right? Like try to pay off debt, reduce staff payments in the interim, like time and hours. And she went left and got another job. And then COVID happened, and we didn't shut down in 2020 like we were going to.
Okay. When did you shut down? 2021?
So I ended up selling the brewery at a massive loss September 3rd, 2021. Not that I had any drama around it or remember that at all, but that's when it happened.
And you sold the everything, like at the business, the equipment, everything all at once rather than selling it off piecemeal?
Yeah, so I ended up finding somebody who wanted to open a brewery up near where we are, like I wouldn't say suburbs. There's a Canyon Lake, is a big lake up in the area where we are, and they were going to open a brewery there, and they saw this for sale for nothing, and they were like, well, let's just do that first, learn the industry, and then kind of take what we've learned and do it the right way where we are. And so they got a great deal. I think, as a mixed culture brewery, you've got years and years of inventory, so you can have verticals and stuff. I believe that they paid about twice what my actual inventory value was, and they got all the equipment, the business, the IP, all of it. So gotcha. I lost my ass. They did fine, but
did the brand name live on?
Yep, they kept the brand name, which I was surprised. I actually told them that they should not, but they didn't listen to me. So
okay, and how do you know how it's going now?
I know that they don't have an incentive necessarily to make a profit, and nor are they really doing that. But they switched everything. They don't make mixed culture beer anymore. They still have some of our old inventory, but they make quote unquote regular beer. So
okay, have you had it?
Yeah, I go hang out there every once in a while.
Okay.
Actually, the guy who's their brewer, I helped get the job. He was a friend of mine, or is a friend of mine. And then the guy who was the manager of the tasting room is still there too. So yeah, the beer's good. He makes good beer, which is why I recommended him. Right. It isn't that the beer's not great. It's just that it's an IPA. It's a Helles. It's fine, and they do okay there. They definitely have more business in the tasting room than we did, which is a function of not having sour beer.
Right. That's the difference. Okay. Yeah. That's interesting. That must be a weird experience, like going to a place you used to own and paying for product or whatever.
Actually, I love it. It is free because again, there's a lot of, and I use that word lightly, there really was some trauma, and my wife and I actually had to go to therapy and kind of work through, being a partner with your wife in a losing business is stressful from a business environment, but it was really hard on the marriage too. So there was a lot of scars, are a lot of scars from that. But so it's super fun. I love going in and paying. I'm just like, I got nothing to do with this.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a customer. Yeah.
I like that attitude though. That's positive. So I feel like now we've sort of captured that first part of the story, so it's probably a good time to get into the next beer. If you're finished.
Oh, great.
I had a shorty can, so I kind of crushed it a little fast. Tell us about your next one, brother.
All right. So the next one is a brewery that I think is a little bit anomalous in the sense that I've reached out to them. I have talked to them about. So I try to do maybe no more than one brewery a season, and if I can help it, less, that I think are doing it right. Okay. And interview them and find out why. So one of the ones on that list was Steam Whistle up in your neck of the woods.
Let's go.
That was, and I didn't get a chance to try the beer, unfortunately. But so this one is the Russian River Brewing Company.
Just
They have
flex
one of
on
their
us.
peach sours.
Let's
So
go.
I went to Pliny this year for the first time ever,
Oh, for the younger?
and I paid. I was a customer. I didn't ask to talk to the brewer. I just went in and tried to reduce my hangover by drinking triple IPAs, and it worked.
Hell
And
yeah.
so anyway, it was a fun experience, and that brew pub still kills it. I don't know about the Windsor facility; it's a totally different thing, but I feel confident that they are truly and uniquely profitable in that brew pub in downtown Santa Rosa.
Okay. I went to the Windsor one and I loved it. I just wanted to try Pliny from the source and it's just gorgeous. I feel you. I like what they're doing. They've got something special. I think there's a few breweries that exist mostly in the US that just have something really special and that are just, they get lineups for the Pliny the Younger every year. Whenever I just feel like it's never no like as I'll say uncool as like not super popular as West Coast are right now. Personally, I love it, and Pliny's one of my favorite beers of all time. The the fact that they get people there regularly and it's still highly sought after, and if I ever get my hands on it, I'm like I lose my shit being out here. It's special. I think they've really got something cool going on, and it's particularly after so long, and it's like the
Yeah.
benchmark.
Well, and I talk shit about this all the time. Well, first of all, I don't want to. I feel bad. I want to tell you this, but I'm really not an IPA guy. I know
Okay,
you are,
that's
so
all
I
right.
don't want you to hate me. But
No, brother.
um,
More for me.
but I absolutely love Pliny. I absolutely love Blind
It's the
Pig,
best.
and I really enjoyed both younger and elder. I've had many times. Nobody in Texas can do it, and I don't understand why.
They don't
It
like
is
it.
not Santa Rosa. There is not a good West Coast IPA, in my opinion, in the state
I
of
see what you mean.
Texas
Okay.
that can hold a candle to those two, and it makes no fucking sense to me because they don't even hide the recipe. They're not even using unique hops. It's you know what
Yeah.
I mean. It's like so. Anyway, that I think it's hilarious, and I love the beer, and that's another piece of it that I just feel like it shouldn't be that unique and that hard to make, but somehow it is.
That's actually a very interesting point. I have a co-host I was telling you about. So him and I did a West Coast. I think it was this year. I never remember time, but I think we did one this year, like an episode just on West Coast IPAs in from Ontario and Quebec. And there's a couple from here, from in Ontario, that like are just year rounders that aren't anything special, but they're fucking spectacular. And there's a brewery in Quebec called Cinquième Baron, like Fifth Baron, and they're West Coast. They got like 10 different West Coast from like 5% like pales to like 8% doubles, and they're all named after trees like witchwood, juniper, like all that type of shit. And they are just exceptional. Old world hops, sometimes new world hops, but they're all so different and delicate and like perfectly clear. It's money. And when you drink a good West Coast, it's just it's such a break from the haze of everything. It's unfortunate that you don't have that in Texas. Maybe we should do a trade. I can get you some steam. I have some. I got a box of bottles of, which is inconvenient, but I have some bottles of steam whistle in over here, and like some West Coast from San Guillermo are just so good, man. They're so good. It's a pleasure. That hopefully someone out there can do it. It should, like you said, it shouldn't be that hard. I wonder why they didn't do it.
Yeah.
Maybe just
Well,
not
and
doing it
I would
well.
imagine right now, if you're gonna post this online and people are gonna put in the comments about what a dipshit I am because somebody down the street makes it, I haven't had it, I haven't found it, and I'm happy to.
Tell us
I
about
actually
it, guys.
had it. I had a West Coast IPA made in Texas over the weekend, and it had fucking crystal malt in it, and I didn't finish it. I was like, you got to be kidding me! What are you doing? Like,
Do you know what? When I went to, I remember I don't have a ton of experience with Texas beer, and I remember feeling like everything just felt like behind the times. Last time I was there was 2018. We went to South by, and my friend lived in Dallas, so I went back with him. And all the beers that I had that were around, like that were local, like were just sort of like kind of pedestrian, sticky, malty West Coast that should have been like
mhm.
drier and like punchier. Maybe they weren't the freshest or something, but just everything I had wasn't like blowing my mind at all. But I also think that beer scenes are massive, and you need to spend some time and really discover, like, have them fresh and go to the right spots and stuff. But yeah, I see what you're talking about, at least from my very very minimal experience. There's got to be something.
No, and again, I'm sure there are, and I have had many of the beers in Texas, but no, not even scratch the surface. I'm sure there's
Yeah.
400 and something in the state now. So
Well, if anyone in and or around Texas knows of any fire Texan West Coast IPAs. Let us know, like, shoot us a DM, me or Kelly, or comment wherever the fuck on Instagram or YouTube. Let us know, man. I'm curious. So then, to kind of complement that, actually, I feel like we're doing pretty well with the aligning our beers tonight. I just got back from New England. I did 10 days in New England at the end of August, and I went to Treehouse for my first time. So tonight I'm drinking a Treehouse beer. This is called Super Cachet. It is an 8.4% double IPA, and this was a bucket list brewery for me. A lot of people have some choice words to say about Treehouse. I just, like, I don't know, I guess I'm a capitalist maybe, and I just like appreciate entrepreneurialism. And have you been out to, I can't remember if I mentioned it to you on the first call, have you been to Charlton, the Treehouse in Charlton, Massachusetts at all? No. It is, smells great. This is like a month old now too. It's a wonder. It is like a campus. It's fucking huge. When I went that whole trip, fortunately everything was kind of dead. Like, I've seen pictures of a Treehouse has like a shuttle service from one car park to another, and they have like a Instagram or a Twitter account with like drone footage to show how long the line is that day. But I just walked right on up, walked right in, waited like 3 minutes for a beer. Like, it was super chill, so it was money. But I have never in my life, I've been to arguably more breweries than the average person, you know, outside of the beer world, of course. I've never, ever seen that many fermenters in one place in my life. It was like a forest of fermenters. None of them were massive either, which probably explains the volume of SKUs they have. And they had a shit ton of like lager, like horizontal tanks. It was just a wonder of a business. And they've got 5 breweries. I went to Charlton, and then I went to Tewksbury, which is the golf course one. Both very different experiences. Beautiful spots. I really, really fucking enjoyed it. I loved it. Like, the branding, they had everything. I bought some of their coffee, which I'm drinking at home. I'm a big coffee guy, and their coffee is fantastic. It was just more like the scale of what they're doing is so wild to me, and it works. Like, it was just so cool. The staff was so nice. It was just like the branding was everywhere. I don't know. I was just extremely impressed at the sheer scale of it. And it was funny to me because we went to Boston, and all Trillium are all in. They were the 2 that my bucket list. Trillium are all like urban kind of locations, whereas, you know, like Fenway and Fort Point and stuff. Whereas, Treehouse are all in the sticks. Like, I don't know if rural is the right word, but not in the city. So, like, but they definitely a lot. The scale was just insane. Like, and the way I had to watch an 8-minute YouTube video to learn how to be a patron. And I'm not shitting you. Like, you walk up.
Follow the rules.
You don't have a choice. You walk up. You can't go to the bar and pay. You have to buy drink tickets online. So you go, and they don't accept Canadian credit cards. So then my girlfriend had Apple Pay because I can't do it on my phone. And then so it worked. Apple Pay worked, but you have to scan a QR code, buy drink tickets. It's $8 US flat for a drink, and then depending on the beer, if it's a double IPA, I guess it's less of a pour. It's like maybe 12 ounces. If it's a single, it's like a 16 or a 20. And and cocktails, they got cocktails and stuff, all sorts of different shit. So you have to buy that beforehand, and you just show them the QR code on your phone that you get, and they scan that, and you just ask for what you want. So I think that makes the line move faster. And the same deal with the cans. You have to, anything to go, you have to buy it scan the QR code, go in there, order it, pay, show the people there, they scan it, and they go and pick your order and present it to you. So it was a fun but daunting experience. It looks worse than it is, but either way, I just think it's a marvel of whatever you think about it, because I have heard some negative stuff. I did not have a negative experience, but it was just like, what the fuck? The sheer scale of it was just insane. I've absolutely never seen anything like it, so I figured that would be a good one to drink tonight.
Yeah, if few breweries can pull that off, that's pretty amazing.
It's pretty damn cool. Shall we cheers, brother? Cheers, my man.
Cheers to you.
Delicious. This is great as well. I'm a bit of a freshness princess, I guess you'd call me. And this is just over a month old, and she's drinking good. That's the only problem, is that the one thing I detest. Actually, I'd like to get your feedback on this. As a drinker and as a type of cat that maybe, aside from like the lagers and stuff, where I'm more than happy to get a 4-pack or whatever, or a 6er, most of the places I go sell 4-packs. I hate 4-packs. Let me buy one. Let me buy two. I went to Fiden's in Albany, New York, which is, in my opinion, I think they are the greatest hazy IPA brewery anywhere. And they let you buy singles. So whilst I probably should have got more in hindsight, they only had 3 beers available. So I just got 2 of each. Gladly drank them all. Fucking beautiful. Everything else I had to get 4-packs, and I had to trade people because I'm like, these are going to die. I can't. I think I came back with like 5 or 6 cases of overall over 10 days. It was obscene. And the 4-packs, as a consumer, whilst I understand the economics, I guess, of it from a brewery side, like, I don't need 4 of anything almost ever. What do you think about that, both as a drinker and as you know, when you in your former life as a brewery owner? Like, does that make sense? What did you do at the brewery as well?
Well, as a mixed culture brewery, a lot of what we did was individual.
Of course. Yeah.
But that became a problem. And so at the end of the day, before we were done, I think it was 2020. I might have even been the month of the lockdowns. We started experimenting with doing 4-packs of 12-ounce bottles, but at retail, which I think is a very different animal, because they're just, people don't shop the singles shelf there. But at the brewery, for sure, singles make more sense. Now, that being said, we would have people come in and order a case of the beers when we had them in the 12-ounce. So I think having both choices is good. For you, I mean, if you buy an individual can, you're probably getting screwed on your per ounce price. But if you're happy with the transaction, then it seems dumb that a brewery wouldn't let you do that.
Yeah, I agree. One of my favorite models. I was just at Burlington Beer Co. in that trip in Vermont. Love the breweries. I was hanging out with the owner, and I was telling him that I always tell people, and I big them up a lot on this pod. They did a few things that I really, really enjoyed. Actually, also could get your feedback on this. One thing that they always do, they sell 4-packs, but for 2, and most of the 4-packs are around, like, they're really reasonable. They're $14, $16, something like that. Pretty good US. And you pay $2 more, and you can get a mix pack. And as opposed to not doing it, that's a surcharge of 50 cents a can to get a mix. I think that is a genius thing. And the second thing I think they do that is amazing, which I don't know if they pioneered it, but it was the first time I'd seen it, was instead of having like a flagship, you know, like there's always around that maybe people get bored of, they had a series of, like, I guess you'd call them core beers to a degree, that repeat semi-regularly. So like you've got there's one beer called As Complicated Being a Wizard. They got like funny names. And like that beer, you'd drink it now, then the next time you come in a month's time, it's gone. But then you come back in 2 more months and then it's back again. So maybe it comes back 4 times a year. You know what I'm saying? So they're repeating stuff so that while those core beers, or beers that are, I guess, core, whatever you want to call them, but have a recipe that gets tweaked and gets improved over time, as opposed to doing a one-off, which either going to hit or miss. At least these, you can get to know it. It's like, they're like, oh, this new batch is fucking slapping right now. And they're repeating it along with sprinkling in some one-offs and stuff like that. And I just think that's like such a great way. So those 2 things, the minor surcharge for a 4-pack and the repeating of core beers to avoid fatigue and to avoid like, oh, it's always here, I'm not going to get it. Oh shit, it's back, I haven't had this in 6 months. Like, So any thoughts on that? But once again, as a consumer and as a brewery owner.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I would technically have sort of the opposite opinion of you, or the opposite perspective, I should say, not necessarily opposite opinion. But so from the idea of doing the mixed 4-pack, I think that kind of experimentation is imperative. And if people like you are coming in that want to do that and are willing to pay for it, it could be genius. But if they test it and the market says you can eat a dick, they should probably stop it. But if it's working, right? We should all be trying new stuff. Maybe people want 1-ounce pours for $10. Sell it to them if they want it, right? If you can make it work. Right. The other one, that's something that I think the industry struggles with, is whether or not to have cores. And in a sense, it's because you've got different customers. So where you love, and again, guys like us love just, oh, what do you have that's new? It's interesting and that's fun. It's really hard to be profitable doing that because you don't have the consistency. And I remember my distributor, 2012 maybe, they were telling me about, and they were the ones that they sold Pabst, I think it was, and they were telling me about how the Pabst numbers were down 1 month a year before that, and they had gone into this gas station that sold whatever it was, like 3 cases a week, every week for like 15 years. And they're like, oh, what did we do wrong? Why'd you take it out? He goes, oh, no, Jim died. And he's like, oh,
Oh,
Jim was buying all of it. And so, ultimately, you can create a
Jesus.
strong, lasting, consistent business by having Jim sit in that chair every 3 days a week and ordering the same damn beer 5 at a time. And so there's a to-go model. What you're going to bring back to Canada, maybe not as interesting. And there's also the I need consistent income every day and regulars that come on Wednesdays that are off days. And maybe you've got to have something stoic and boring to do that. I don't know, but that seemed to be what worked for us. So.
Interesting. I think that's key as well because I always try and think of it from both sides, like both from the drinker who kind of wants to try something different, particularly if it's something. How do I say it? If it's my local guys, when I say just within around Ontario, and I've got a store here which they actually legally only started during COVID in Ontario. I don't know if you probably are familiar, but the LCBO, it's the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, is the largest alcohol purchaser in the world. They basically had everything in a stranglehold. Then they opened it up to, or they had this other place called the Beer Store, which kind of sucks dick. It used to be it's owned by it used to be government, but now it's owned by the big guys, like I think Molson and Sapporo, and someone else owns it. It's kind of whack. So it's where all the people who just buy cases of Bud and shit typically go. The LCBO is pretty dope now. They got a big craft section and everything. They're really big supporters of everything, but it's still a bureaucratic headache to get in. Then they opened grocery stores, but even that was pretty hard to get a SKU in there. But I think that's changing, and they did a test run of only 150 grocery stores in the whole province, which is the most populous province in Canada, so it's not many. But I think they're opening that up. But then what they did is, say, to supplement income for cafes, restaurants, bars, during COVID, they let them sell packaged alcohol, which was never allowed before, as long as it was sold with a food item. So they have like those mini bags of chips for like 50 cents, or some place sold me a mint for 25 cents because they had to. It's food, and like that, it's bullshit, but it's like negligible. And you get a pack of chips, like sweet. I'm not mad at that. So there's this cafe here in Hamilton where I'm at that I love. I always shout them out. Duran, they're the best. And they got the best beer fridge in Ontario because the owner drives to the best breweries every week and gets all the new shit. So as a local, for the breweries that I really love, I like trying all the new stuff every week. I think that's what I want. And often those guys, a couple of my favorites, like there's a brewery called Third Moon, another one called Badlands, they almost like every year around the same time will drop the same beer, but they're only going to be available once that year. And then Third Moon, for example, has a couple of flagships that are basically always available, which is dope. But if I'm traveling and I'm going to a new brewery and I don't know much about it, I'm like, we went to Allagash. Fucking, we're going to have Allagash White, goddammit. Like, you're going to have it. But if it's a brand new brewery, I've never been there, I'm like, what's your flagship? What's the one? Let me try that. I want to try it. It's the complete opposite if it's new to me, because that beer is still new to me. So none of the beers, all of them are fun. None of them are boring to me. And I want to know, like, if I'm trying to understand your brewery, if I'm going to have, I would never go to a brewery really, for the most part, and have one. I'd always have at least two I like to do. Unless I'm like on a little fucking, what's it called, like a crawl or something. And I'm like, I did that in Portland, Maine. There's a bunch of places I had like one beer. It was annoying to me, but I got the vibe of more places by doing that. So cool. But I would probably like to try a flagship and then something new. Something like fun and different, just because then like I get two experiences. I'm like, all right, this is what you're selling year round, and this is what your funky shit is for this week. Dope. Then I'm like, cool. I kind of get what you're about, So I think there's like value for different types of drinkers, but I see what you're saying where you're talking about the locals who are just like, give me their lager, and they buy a case of that shit once a week or once every 2 weeks and whatever it might be, and that's that repeat business. So that makes sense to me.
Well, and it sounds like, interestingly, I knew about the LCBO. I did not realize that was exclusive. When I was talking to, was it I think
Steam Whistle?
Steve over at Steam Whistle? He was telling me that
Greg,
obviously
I
they
think,
had a great relationship. Greg Taylor, that's what it was. Yeah,
I saw it.
He was telling me they had a great relationship with them and that it worked really well. In the States, we have so many places that you can distribute packaged beer to that it really, especially like the 2016 through and then COVID, just exploded. But that drove decisions for a lot of breweries, like how do we hit retail? And even seasonals were a pain in the ass. So I remember the largest liquor store in Texas, it was like '08 that I was starting to talk to them about, like, okay, the seasonal thing, I know some breweries are doing it where they have one SKU. So they go into you and they're like, hey, approve seasonal SKU at 87 stores. And then they don't have to get the the fruited milkshake IPA that they released in February reapproved because they've already got that seasonal fruited SKU, right? And he was like, yeah, we're doing away with that. We're not gonna let them do that anymore. So now they're gonna have to go back to getting every beer approved. That changes the entire business. That's
Right.
they were 150 stores in Texas alone, and if that was part of your business, you now had to go back and figure that out. That's not a small thing.
No. That's the one thing I have noticed a lot in a lot of breweries is, talking about like I heard the taxation is a big thing, and I know that differs obviously, probably city by city, let alone state or province. And the second thing is just the red tape, bro. Like all answer this actually. I'd be curious about Texas because you'll probably be aware. Like so in Quebec and Ontario, a lot of the rules are leftovers from the 20s, from the prohibition days. Like there was laws in Quebec that from I think 1928 was the main alcohol law, and they only allowed serving in growlers and brewing in cool ships within the last like 5 years, which is fucking insane. Insane.
Like cool ships, what would that have to do with anything about protecting the consumer from rampant alcoholism? Like, oh,
That's
it's got bacteria in it.
yeah, like marijuana is legal in federally in Canada. I can buy gummies. There is more weed stores in Hamilton in this city than anywhere in the country. This is where it was piloted. So I can buy weed on every other street corner, which is dope because I'm an edible guy. I think it's lit, but I just order it online anyway. I can be fuck going to a store, but I just like that it's available. So what the fuck are you overly regulating alcohol at a time when there's like I actually saw these stats. There's more people, more households supported, and more people employed by craft brewers who have 5% of the market as opposed to 12% in the states. So 5% of Canada's market is craft, but the breweries have like I think craft breweries have like 70 or 80% of the employees, like the employment. So all they're doing is hurting businesses. They're stopping revenue opportunities at a time when inflation's through the roof and interest rates are crazy and groceries are out of control everywhere in the world. I know it's not local at all, but I just can't fathom why during COVID, so there was some sort of emergency where they were like, you know what, cafes can now fucking sell cans of beer. Go and do it. So cool. So pull down these other bullshit laws too, but then they kept the taxation and they kept all of this red tape that stops you from shipping interprovincially, and even in Quebec you can't do like in Ontario. It's dope. I can order online. They'll ship to you. Like they have full systems. In Quebec they can't do that. So, but all the Ontario brewers can only ship within the province. They can't ship to anywhere else. So. Yeah, like, is it similar in Texas where they have these absurd, dated, archaic laws that are just holding the industry hostage?
Yeah, well,
Probably in
here's
different
the
ways, I
interesting
guess.
thing, and I wish I could remember where I heard it because I don't like to necessarily say these things without being able to tell you exactly which subsection of the law it's in. But I used to complain a lot. So every state pretty much has an ABC. So ours is TABC, Texas Alcohol and Beverage Commission,
Okay.
and we all bitched about them, right? Like everything, their laws are all stupid. The way they handle stuff is stupid. The way they make us do reporting is stupid, and they literally are like fighting against us. And then we would all complain. And then I don't remember where I read, but TABC's actual motto, like their model, the reason they were created, their job is not to just regulate alcohol.
Okay.
It is specifically at their annual meeting, they are tasked with the job of limiting the consumption of alcohol in the state. And they actually look at their success or failure based on the actual consumption level of ethanol in the state of Texas.
Jesus.
And when you think of it through that lens, you're like, well, no fucking wonder they're a pain in the ass. They don't want us drinking. That's their job.
Wow.
And so now it's like, well, I should be mad at the politician, not at the ABC, but ultimately that's the whole point.
Do you think
I would imagine it's something similar.
that's what I was about to say? Yeah, it's probably the same, similar in other states and other provinces, and arguably other countries. Interesting.
Yeah, so they're taxing consumption the same way that like we tax cigarettes, and
Right.
cigarettes used to be like an 80-cent tax. Now it's like a $7 tax because they're trying to limit you from doing it. It doesn't
Right.
work, but you and I know that one guy we talked about, Hendo.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know
Yes.
what the taxes are? The tax rate is on alcohol in Australia?
No, what is it?
Blew my mind. I think in Texas, TABC charges. I mean, it's like a couple bucks a barrel. I don't know what it is. It isn't much. 50% in Australia.
I'm not surprised. I remember every time I go back, I am fucking gobsmacked at how expensive beers are. My favorite brewery is called Banks. I think to get a 4-pack of their haze is about $60 Australian, which is
Yeah,
about the
30
same.
goes to the government.
Yeah. And I remember being at a bar, and because I'm visiting, I hadn't seen anybody for a while. Everyone's buying me beers, and I know it was a tap takeover at one of my favorite like beer bars. So it was from that brewery called Tool, T-O, then the O with the thing through it. Yeah, it was like $19 half pints, and people were just like, yeah, and just buying them for me, like as if they were used to it. I was like, this is just out of control. Like I'm like in the States, I go to Vermont because I used to go. At the time, I was living in Montreal, so I went to Vermont all the time. It's like $8, like for a pint almost anywhere type of thing, and I couldn't get past it. Yeah, so Australia is like screwed really bad, and Canada has a really bad tax thing because it's, I guess, democratic socialism here. So I don't think the socialism works super well. The healthcare sucks ass, but things are supposed to work better by paying higher taxes, and I get the concept of it, but with regard to alcohol, that's so interesting you say that their job is to restrict the consumption of ethanol. So I wonder if there's a way to find out if other regulatory bodies in different places are doing the same thing, because that's the only thing that would make sense. It's like their policies are so ridiculous that the only possible thing that they could be out to achieve is to regulate and reduce consumption. But whilst I understand that, we do have to realize that alcohol is it's a drug technically, and it isn't the healthiest thing in the world for people. You look at, I don't know, like coming back from the States for cities like Savannah, Georgia, Key West, and Las Vegas, where you can just drink in the streets and no one gives a fuck. Like there's basically all the rules that everywhere else. Like it just feels like you just wild out. But everything was very, in all of those places. I mean, Vegas is probably a little bit of a different story, but Savannah was super chill. Key West was super chill. I didn't know about either of those places until we went there. Then they told us at the hotel, and I was like, what? Let's go. And it it was fun, but nothing was out of control. So it's almost like that all of the rules, like, people walk around smoking weed here all the time. So what difference is it if I'm walking around drinking a beer? Like, it makes no difference. Like, I just don't see the level of, I guess, spending on, what's the word? Like, policing all of this stuff. You've actually got literal people that, if a cop sees you drinking a beer and walking down the street, you're going to get fined and whatever happens. I imagine it's just a fine. But then you got the cats, sleeping in tents in parks, shooting up and waving their dicks at children's, and they're fine, I guess. But but if I'm drinking my beer down the street, God help me, I should go to jail. Like, it's just like, it's also backwards, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And these breweries, these companies are small businesses like yours. You and your wife own this business. I'm sure you invested a lot of money, like 6-7 figures at minimum, into this business, and you're employing people, but they're making your life harder, and they're making it just so difficult. And I feel like at this point, it's not prohibition anymore. People have learned how to regulate it. There's some people who don't, but there's a lot of people on meth and heroin and all this shit anyway. So, like, I just don't really see the problem is not what it was in the 20s. And while, I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of that, but the illogicalness of it all is infuriating to me. And I'm not even financially involved in the industry at all. I'm just on the peripheral. So it drives me nuts, dude.
Yeah, well, obviously I don't live in Canada, but my opinion of some of where that comes from, at least here in the States, is that we are really, really bad at taking responsibility for our actions as a country, and personal responsibility is not something that gets held up very often. So,
Okay.
if we can say that I wouldn't be an alcoholic if the laws were better, it's almost in that sense, right? Like, sure. Do you guys have the same? So what in here? Spirits, wine, and beer can all do different things.
Okay. Meaning?
So like so with spirits, you can go to a distillery, you can drink a flight, you can only buy 2 bottles a month, none on Sunday, and they
That's
can't
a religious shit. Yeah, we don't have that.
You can go to a winery.
Mm-hmm.
They can be open 7 days a week. You can buy wine there, and they can ship it to you, and there's no limit.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go to a brewery. They can't ship it to you. They can be open 7 days a week. what's the difference? But all of them are different. Even the marketing laws are different, where wine can incentivize, spirits can incentivize in ways that beer can't. The laws are all different. And in Texas, it's even different. If you make a 3.5% alcohol beer, your laws are different than if you make a 4% alcohol beer.
Wow. Okay. I know the taxation's different. Here, I think it's called, there's like beer, strong beer. I think if it's over 6%, it's extra strong beer. Like it's all this ridiculous. Do they even say it on here? Maybe because this one is not a LCBO beer. Like if you put it in the LCBO, you've got more rules because Godspeed doesn't distribute, so there's no barcode. So they don't have any rules or anything on it. But the in Ontario, you can only buy spirits from the LCBO. That's it. Period. And or the distillery. That's it. But there's no. I don't believe there's any restriction as to when they can open. Usually, I find the Sundays are usually places that were previously or are based on religion. I think, if I'm not mistaken, like
we
in
call
Quebec,
them blue laws.
blue. Okay, perfect. In Quebec, there's the equivalent of the LCBO. It's called the SAQ. And that is also the only place you can buy spirits in Quebec. In Quebec, you can buy all wines from the SAQ. In the supermarket, you can only buy, and I don't know how they separate it, but it's shit wines. And I don't know how else to explain it, but they're like lower quality, weird brands, blends, nothing good. That's all cheap and nasty. And then you go to SAQ, then you get the proper, Canadian and Italian and French and American stuff. Like I don't get
No
it.
obvious delineation. It's just you don't think it's coincidental that it all just happens to suck because there's only certain conglomerates that can go in there.
It could just be that. Yeah. It could be that.
It's a taster. A taster's like, no, this wine's good. You need to go
it's too good.
to the other
SAQ. Imagine if that's what it is. But it's like, yeah, just even thinking of that, that's really how it works here. So it's like, and I know, yeah, every sort of place is different. Like I feel like can you buy spirits in the grocery store in Texas?
No, so there's a whole other piece of that too, where they're actually like even at the grocery store, the beer aisle, they would lock that shit like Saturday at midnight, I think, and you couldn't open it until noon on Sunday. No grocery stores can sell liquor. You can't sell liquor at a gas station. So, Fireball, I assume you guys have that up there.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
Fireball, in response to not being able to sell in the convenience stores, they actually made a malt-based version of the little like individual shots, and they can sell that shit at the convenience store. And I think they're killing it with it, which makes a lot of sense.
Good for them.
It's like it's the same brand, but it's not made the same, and so it's okay to sell that one.
See, like this is when it becomes like it's like we're like a victim to our own archaic rules, and like politicians are the only ones that can change it, but they benefit so much financially from lobbyists and all this type of stuff. And then there's probably a lot of people who are just stuck in their ways and like, we do it this way because we've always done it this way. And then all of a sudden you get these stupid ass rules and shit that like, I don't know, it just doesn't really help. I think for it, and I do understand, like I mentioned before, the alcohol thing, that, we're talking about things that probably aren't best for people. However, I don't know, Canada, once again, if you want to I've been learning a lot about this recently, about the politics stuff. I never gave a shit in my life until like the COVID times, and I starting to learn. So America being a capitalist country, I'm sort of surprised that that there's still so many ridiculous rules, because you guys have a lot less sort of I was going to say oppressive. It's probably not the right word, but just sort of like difficulties and sort of red tape. Maybe it's like different red tape. There's certain things here that we get, as a business owner, we can't do that I see I barely see anyone here, if you want to talk about beer, that have a second tap room. Whereas almost everywhere I've been this year, I would say, I'm pulling this out of my ass, like 60 to 70% of breweries that I've been around this year, when I've, driving to Florida, driving to New England, and I think we went to Western, to Buffalo and Rochester, like, yeah, 60, 70% have a secondary location. Whereas here, it's like almost impossible to do that. Like it's super difficult. There's the red tape around that is bonkers. So it's like just small things. Like I just don't understand that when we're going through an economic downturn, which tends to happen, it's, still all fake, but here we are. Why do these rules persist? Like I just don't see any value in that. I just don't see how that's helping. And people are struggling to afford rent and groceries, and more people here in Canada, which never happened before, are sleeping in tents in parks. Whereas that, Skid Row's been around forever, and everywhere in the States, I feel like had a lot more hardship because of that capitalist. It's kind of fend for yourself, where in democratic socialist countries you're supposed to be taken care of, but it's got to the point where everyone's paying so many taxes and everything's so expensive that one little rise in rent, there's people who aren't addicts or have mental health issues are just on the street because they have nothing else, they nowhere else to go. Like, it's fucked. It's a really bad time, dude. I'm like, I just don't understand why one little bureaucratic adjustment could change everything for businesses and therefore employ more people and then help people get back on their feet and generate, I just don't understand. It's just, I don't know. It's just crazy to me seeing all of this,
Yeah. Well, don't ask American politicians to figure it out. We can't even figure out how to make a budget as a government every year. And that's based on numbers and facts and figures. Like, how the fuck can you not make a budget? I don't understand. But
I'm not gonna lie, they can't do that here either. So it's, I just think it seems to me everywhere, and I bitch about this to my Australian friends, and they're like, oh yeah, it's fucked here. They're telling me all the same problems. So I'm like, it really does seem to be a global thing right now, but it's just like, if some laws could be removed, I know we're kind of like tangenting, we're supposed to be talking about other stuff, but I know, we're on the same wavelength, so you get it. But yeah, it just makes no sense to me how they just don't help companies like breweries who employ, like, a lot of breweries don't just have like one or two employees. Some do. But most of them probably have a number of employees, like any given restaurant or, any hospitality business. And there's like front of house, back of house, auxiliary, cleaning, blah, blah, blah. So many different people that can work there and that just, want to work and want to get paid decent wages. And they're just, all these restrictions on breweries to not be able to make enough money to therefore be able to sell their products and pay it. It's just sad and ridiculous. I don't like things that aren't logical. I'm seeing way too much of that, and it's super frustrating. We could bitch about that.
Said, like, why do you enter the alcohol industry? It's the most heavily regulated industry in the country. And I used to own 8 fitness centers. We had barely any regulation, and I now kind of get that. Like, at some point, you can't just make whatever. Well, I actually joked about this when I first started. Everything that I did in the fitness industry to market my brewery to individual people, or market my fitness center to individual people, was illegal under Texas Alcohol and Beverage Commission laws when I opened my brewery. I was like, I can't go guerrilla marketing. I can't go door to door. You know what I mean? Like, why not? Why can't I go down the street and just offer free beer? Technically, as a license holder, I can't do that. And that just doesn't make any sense. I mean, people can say no if you don't want to drink. If I give it to a 16-year-old kid, that's on me. I go to jail.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you would avoid doing that because going to jail is a pretty nice, like a repercussion that you want to avoid. So it's like, yeah, man, it's just so silly to me. So I mean, like, even just, I actually kind of feel like now in hindsight that all of this little tangent is very relevant to the conversation because it is, a lot of the downside of being involved in the alcohol industry in any major way. It's frustrating no matter where you're based, really. So getting back to your story, dude, like you closed in September 2021. September 3rd, I think you said. Mm-hmm. And then, since then, basically, obviously, you've got you wrote the book before you started the podcast, and then you're doing a second book. But talk us through what happened. So from after selling that brewery and handing over the keys and, washing your hands of the situation, how did that go down from there?
So I stayed on as consultant for a solid month. I think
That's good.
Might have been 3 to 4 days a week. Yeah, it was 3 days a week for the whole month. So I still made all the beer. They hadn't hired David, so it was literally just me still working there, a little bit less hours for no money. But during that time, I got my real estate license, and my wife had left in 19 to go work for a developer, and she was like, dude, sales history, this will be easy. And I got my license October 21st, I think, is when that happened. I was done with the brewery completely. Yeah, I think 6 weeks is when I did. Well, after I stopped consulting 3 days a week, that was my job. So it was like, 10 hours a day I was doing that. But yeah, so I started doing that. And then the first 2 podcast episodes were released August. So before I had closed, I released those because I was starting the podcast then. But those are very early examples of what was happening. And I continued to do the podcast, did the real estate. I think in 2022, I made somewhere around 10 times what I made any single year in the brewing industry. So it was a good year, and I had time to do the podcast, really evolved that. And like I said, just kind of restructured what I was doing and had a lot of fun with it. But there were times I'd take 2 months off of doing episodes, and then it was very hard for me to find people too. I'd get told no a lot, and I still do, but I get told no less often than I did back then.
So maybe just explain the whole concept of the podcast in general. I feel like we sort of did, but maybe we didn't really go into it in general. So like, yeah, obviously it's How Not to Start. The podcast was always How Not to Start a Damn Brewery, not The Fucking was the book, right?
It was, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, so complete transparency, to be perfectly honest, I wrote the book. The book was about what I went through. The book was about the mistakes that I made. There was a lot of industry commentary, but at the end of the day, I tried to keep it mostly about things that I knew what I was talking about and the things I had facts and figures for. And it was failure. It was, I mean, there was a lot of depression and like just, sadness and dealing with that and having to accept that I'm telling you that I lost money. I'm telling you that I went into business and I didn't do a good job and I didn't learn how to be profitable. And I knew that I wasn't, but I felt very alone. And so a lot of the beginning of the podcast was me exploring what happened with other people as a bit of validation, to be perfectly honest, that I'm not the only one that's experiencing this. And I knew that it was rampant. I didn't know how deep it went. And the more and more that I've been talking to people, I can tell you that I personally couldn't tell you one brewery that I know beyond a shadow of a doubt is profitable on a 3-year period, except for one, because I've seen their numbers, but they do 25 million a year. So it's a little different, but
right. Okay. So it was, I mean, I kind of like that. It's like therapeutic for you, really, like initially.
Extremely. Yeah.
That's cool, man. I think that's actually quite healthy if you really want to think about that. Like that's actually, that's dope. So then you started the pod, and the idea, just like to break it down, because you told me when we were talking, as far as the things you talk about on these podcasts with breweries are pretty, like, I don't mean it in a bad way, like invasive. Like you're asking some pretty like detailed questions, and they have to send you some documentation, as far as like the P&Ls and things like that to sort of show, to really like get into it, because you're really trying to drill down on the mistakes. So the breweries that you're selecting, because this is, one of the things you and I were talking about was that, my podcast is very like, hey, tell me about your story. Let's fucking chat, and yours is more like, tell me how you fucked up. Like it's very, different approach. So like, how do you select your potential guests for the pod?
Well, I do a lot of research, and like obviously on social media is where you get a lot of it, but like kind of just researching the story and whether it's interesting. And I say on the podcast many times, like, I don't interview dipshits that made shitty beer and ugly packaging, because we know why that didn't work.
Right.
There's no story there, right? Like, so there are breweries that I'm like, wow, they went out of business. I don't want to tell that story because they're fucking stupid and they made gross beer. But so again, I get told no a lot, so I don't always get the guys that I want. Although I will admit, some of the people that told me no early because they didn't want to be one guy told me that he did not want to be the poster child for failure. And there's no argument to that. I totally get it, right? Like I was the poster child. I am the poster child for failure. So it's a lot to take. And so I get it. A lot of people want to walk away.
I mean,
I told you that I finally, go ahead.
No, that was it. I was just, yeah, man, I get it. I totally get it.
So I think I told you that I finally got a guy from the UK to reach back, because I've reached out to a lot of them. And so really dug a lot last night into sort of the Instagram side of what the beer industry in the UK looks like. And this is a thing that comes up a lot in the podcast is, how did you close? Okay. And some people just stop posting, stop making beer. You never hear from them again because they don't want to face it. Again, totally get it. Then there's like the closing party, and then there's, we're closing tomorrow, get in here. But some people will give you like 4-6 weeks. Second Self in Atlanta, I was able to go out there. I interviewed the guy, and he's like, well, we're closing in a month. And I looked at the calendar. I'm like, I can be there. I will be there at the closing. But anyways, in the UK, no one had a closing party. And I'm not saying no one did, but no one online that I could find that closed in 2023 did anything other than the letter on the last photo that says, "Hey, we're all really glad we got to share these memories with you. This is going to be the last weekend. Peace out." You know what I mean? At the end of the day.
Interesting. So it's like there's many different. I didn't think about that actually. Different approaches to closing, and I've seen all of the above, which is interesting. Was there like, did anyone that you spoke to ever have a reason for doing it? Like aside from like, was it really just like I don't want to face it? Like it's really that serious that they were embarrassed or something, as opposed to like, hey man, let's celebrate what we had. And let's go out with a bang. They would rather just disappear. Then obviously people are going to fucking talk about it. Like people are going to know that they don't exist no more.
Yeah, no. So I think, I don't know if I told you this part, but one of the reasons at the end of the day, the ultimate reason I started the podcast in the beginning, like it ended up being therapeutic. It ended up allowing me the opportunity to have other people back me up that I'm not the only dipshit who can't run a brewery in the country. But the reason I ultimately started it is that in 2019, when I sat with my wife, this is over, we can't figure this out. When I wrote the outline that ultimately became the book, it was like, what did I do wrong? I was looking for this podcast. I started looking in the beer industry, like who the hell is talking about the business of craft beer? How can I find out what to do better and how to run my business? Okay, that doesn't exist. What about wine? What about spirits? No one was doing a business of ethanol production podcast talking about how to do it better. And I was like, well, hopefully someday someone will come along and take this from me. But for now, this shit's got to get said because of, and I apologize, it's a long way to get back to that.
No, it's all right.
The embarrassment piece. I didn't want to close because I was embarrassed. I talked to other brewery owners around me who are still open, sort of, to this day, who were like, dude, we're not profitable either. We're getting our ass handed to us. Like last month, it cost me 20 grand to stay open. But no one wants to close. And I felt like there was a piece of that too, where by telling these stories, I'm allowing that person not to remortgage the house and to maybe not continue to do it, to just to be able to accept that maybe this isn't going somewhere and maybe my talents would be better used in another industry or God forbid, go work for another brewery and not have to worry about losing money every month. Which I interviewed a guy in Austin 2 weeks ago that's what he did. He closed the brewery. He took a head brewer job, and he was laughing and smiling and giddy about it because he was like, dude, it's 5. I clocked out.
I totally get that because there's a lot of pressure being the owner. You know, like there's a lot of like I have employees for my company, and like you got to make payroll. You got to fucking pay those payroll taxes by the 15th of every month. Like it's it's hectic. What did you do, by the way? When you closed, did you do the announcement? Did you do the party? Like, did you do 4 weeks notice? What'd you do?
Yeah, I kind of had a different situation. So I haven't mentioned, but I would joked with people when I left. I think actually one of my first podcasts with Jody, I may have said it on there. I was curious who was going to take the mantle of the most hated brewery owner in Texas, because I was by far, and if I was second place, you wouldn't know the difference, but there was online, especially I was definitely one of the most hated brewery owners in Texas. And so there's a bunch of reasons for that. One, and I actually put in the book, one of my mistakes was give every fuck you have about online beer reviews. And there's this period where Untapped, the Facebook groups, they were just like brutally fucking mean about beers they just didn't like, or if you had an overcarbed bottle or whatever, like super easy to replace it, but they would just go online and just eviscerate you, where it's like, hey, I had this bad bottle. Clearly the guy that makes it rapes babies. It was essentially where the conversation would go. And I got mad. And I have a little bit of wit, and so I used it more often than I should have. And that was a mistake. I've definitely learned from that somewhat. But anyways, it was mostly online. But there also was, I think there were some other reasons for it. We just dissect that. They're completely theoretical. But anyway, my point being that I recommended that the owners really do a Kelly's gone. Let's have a burn an effigy to me. Like have some fun with it. I was like, dude, you guys should really play this up. And they didn't want to do that. And I think they're just actually real nice people. I mean, I know they're nice people. I think that's why they didn't do it. But we did finally have I don't even remember when it was. I think it was maybe 2 weeks after I finally stopped consulting. And so maybe 6-8 weeks after I left, they did have a goodbye to the Myers party, and Lindsay and I showed up and a lot of our friends were there, and it was a nice event. But again, they didn't have to do that, and I recommended they didn't. But I enjoyed it while I was there.
Okay, that's cool though. Yeah, it's a tough one. I definitely understand it, but I mean, like, you know, I imagine you probably have as well. I've read a lot of, my favorite thing I read is biographies, and I always, like, I feel like most people who have become successful have failed like 17 times before they've nailed it, and they write books about their failures because that's what's made them who they are. So I don't think there's anything to be embarrassed about failing. I had so many different businesses, obviously nothing to the level of what you're doing before we get to ours, which is profitable, and we bought a house off it, we have employees and blah blah blah. But like, I've done a whole bunch of things over the years. Nothing worked until this did. It just is what it is. It's part of the thing. You got to shoot, throw shit at the wall and see what happens. And maybe in beer it's a little different, or beer is very judgmental. The drinkers are, that pisses me off too, the fact that they, like, I pride myself because I know guys like yourself, and we, just like you do, you and I both talk, and you are the type of person I talk to, and you're talking to the same people I talk to, and so you get to know these people and you spend 2, 3, 4, 5 hours with them, and like, you like them. And sometimes you become friends. And I'm like, who the fuck am I to go and shit talk anything? Like, I'm the fucking, like, arbiter of great beer. My palate's the god tier palate. Like, you know what? Sometimes you get a bad can, or sometimes you don't like it. So I'm very cautious with the language I use. And I don't use this platform to shit on anybody because I don't feel that is... it's not getting anybody anywhere. It doesn't make me feel good. It doesn't make anybody, like, the people I'm shitting on, feel like, why would you do that? So, like, if a beer is that bad, I probably wouldn't review it. Or, like, if there's a brewery I really didn't like, I wouldn't have them on the podcast or something. I mean, I don't want to, like, deal in negativity. I don't see that as being positive. But I feel like what you're doing is while it could be perceived as, like, kind of what you're telling me as maybe not so positive, I feel like ultimately it is, because you're providing answers. You're not dwelling on, you fucked up. Like, you're just like, hey man, my brewery closed too, so I had to sell. So what did you let's see what went wrong with you. And then you're like, maybe you should tell it, because what you told me about what you're trying to do with the podcast, can you maybe explain that, as far as, like, the number of episodes you're aiming for, and then what you're going to do once you get that episode? Because I really feel that, like, if people don't understand what you're doing with the pod, like, the next step really breaks it down. And I think that is, like, it's going to be an invaluable tool for brewery owners, like, moving forward.
Yeah, so like you said, like, my goal is not to berate somebody for the failure. I think it's actually the opposite. And the point is to say that not only are we all in this together, but that we are all experiencing many of the same things. And the breweries that you think are more successful than you, more profitable, have better distribution, they're not. And as we're learning that as we talk to each other, from Oregon to Florida. And I think my whole goal, and I'm struggling because I want to write it down, but I know that it would be better to not, is my whole goal with this thing is I really want to get to 100 episodes. And at that point, legitimately consolidate all of this together, where I can kind of lay each interview over it and then look at what's consistent. So is it rent that kills us 80% of the time? Is it underfunded budgets or distribution within your home market? Is that come up 72% of the time? And I think more and more I'm seeing some of those things, and I did do an article for Brewbound that did incorporate some of those, but I didn't do it as an exhaustive list, and I did it more anecdotally, like, this continues to come up, and in this interview he said this, and in this interview she said that. But ultimately, that's my goal, is to get. I don't think I'll make it to 100. I told you 75. That's my worst case, but I really would rather do 100 episodes, and then just figure out all the similarities. And then write a book with it.
It's such a dope idea. So for people who don't know, I mentioned it before, the Tribe of Mentors from Tim Ferriss. So he took, like, I can't remember how many people, but, like, a whole bunch of successful people, and gave them, like, essentially a questionnaire that they filled in, and printed that in the book, and then extrapolated the commonalities. And something that you said to me was that, like, maybe you might be better if you just say it. What you said to me when we had our initial chat Could you repeat that on here? Because I just thought that was so poignant, and I think it was exactly that. You can, what I'm talking about how you can learn more
Yeah.
from. Yeah,
So I've read that book and I listened to his podcast for years. And I'll be perfectly honest, like I stopped listening to it because of the fact that the strength of his podcast became the weakness for me in the sense that it was sort of the same story. It was like, oh, you also get up at 5 a.m., drink a wheatgrass shake, and exercise. That clearly isn't the only reason that you're successful, but it isn't hurting and it's definitely leading towards it. And so the more and more I really tried to incorporate some of these things in my life, again, I think Tim Ferriss is great, but I felt like there wasn't new information there. And for me, I've read multiple books on success. I've listened to How I Built This, the podcast,
oh, I love
very
that.
similar stories over and over. But I feel like these stories of failure are teach because there's a million ways to fail, and it seems like there's only like two or three to succeed. Like you kind of always have to do the same thing, get lucky, be in the right place, and have a shit ton of money, and then customers that like you. But the way these businesses are failing, I guarantee you could extrapolate the same things over the hospitality industry. There's probably the fitness industry. Some of these people that are going out of business are all experiencing some of the same things. And I think there's a lot more to learn from failure than there is from success, and that's ultimately the goal.
I just love that so much, man. That as a business owner, that's a book I would, regardless of the industry, though. Like obviously, I'm interested in the industry you're talking about, but I bet you $1,000,000 the lessons that you would extrapolate from those craft breweries would apply to essentially any industry. And I just find that inspiring, and I find it just sort of like helpful. Because if I'm trying to read that book and I've got a marketing agency alongside other, I guess this is a business technically, and I'm seeing all the different things like, oh, this went wrong, I'm like, oh, okay, because it's not just going to be specifics about, oh yeah, the red tape. I mean, there'll be some of that and stuff, but I bet a lot of the things will just be applicable across every industry. So it sounds like a type of book that no matter what you're into, if you are either starting a business, you already have a business, you're thinking about starting a business, like that's the type of shit you need to read to really like just sort of prepare yourself for the worst case and to try and avoid, if you can there's nothing like better than someone who's done it telling you what to avoid, because you're like, oh shit, you're saying okay, cool, and you could just be in the middle of it. But I feel like a lot of people maybe don't listen. I always feel like, imagine like when we're kids and your parents are telling you don't do stuff, you're like, yeah, whatever, and you go and do it. My girlfriend's cousin works for us. He's 25, I'm 42. He's a champion. I love this guy. I've told him multiple times certain different things that I've learned in life, and he just doesn't listen. And I was like, oh, that's probably what it's like having kids. Like, we didn't have kids. So it's like, okay, he's not listening. He just probably needs to make the mistakes himself. But that's different when you're 25. When you're an adult and you're about to invest money, or you have already invested money into a business, and you'll be able to get some insight onto maybe some other people who have been successful or not been successful, and maybe what you can avoid. That's incredible intel that you would you want.
Well, the hope would be that the industry would be stronger and that the breweries that are continuing to be open would shore up their resources and ultimately maybe find that profitability that my guests and I weren't able to find. And like you said, outside the industry too, it'll be interesting to see, because at the time, who knows what will happen between now and then, or how long it will take me to do it, but it may very well be the largest study on failure ever created. Yeah. So it may have a lot of interesting things for people outside the industry. But I think the restaurant one is obvious that there's definitely overlap there, hospitality in general. But yeah.
How many episodes deep are you now?
I have just released the 50th, and I am behind. I think I have 7 episodes recorded that I haven't released yet.
Okay.
And an interview next week, and hopefully an interview the week after. And so I do 10 episodes per season, and I have literally never started a season with more than 2 recorded. So I'm like deep, but
you're killing it. Okay. Well, hey man, that's positive. That's good. Yeah. I love that. I don't know. I'm excited for you. I think it's just so cool, and I really hope you get to that at 100 level. 75 is cool too. But I don't know. I mean, it might just take a little longer to get to the 100 if that's the case, because like we were saying earlier, it's different when you're trying to analyze someone's failures, and maybe there's a level, like you said, people don't want to be because there's so many other people, it's like if you're asking someone now, if it was for episode 1, I can understand the pushback. But if there's 57 episodes, you've got 50 out, you got 7 more in the canon, no one's the poster boy for shit. You are essentially trying to making yourself the poster boy for that, because you're the one who's like, hey, my brewery didn't work out. I sold that shit. Let's talk about it. You're really being very what's the word? Humble. As far as you're like taking those shots on the chin. You're like, yeah, man, this is what fucked up, but I want to find out what fucked up with you. So then I can find out how everybody messed up, and then now how everyone in future can avoid that. That's like a community service essentially. It's very cool, dude. I love the whole the whole thing.
And I've started kind of explaining it that way too in the quote unquote pitch that I give to people. But how many times, and I'm sure you see it online too, with somebody announces they're closing, and maybe Reddit's the worst, maybe Facebook is, and just the comments and the guesswork and oh yeah, no, I had that shitty barley wine they made in 2014. No wonder they went out of business. And there's a piece of that where it's like, dude, come on the show, set the record straight. What happened? What didn't? Why did it work? And then you get to immortalize your brewery. So at that point, obviously everyone that participates is going to be listed in the book, and your story is going to be anecdotes that kind of come forward. And so for me anyways, and I think a lot of people I've interviewed, yes, the brewery failed. Yes, the in my case, the brand didn't necessarily die, but when I watched them take those barrels out and completely empty them and just switch away from the beauty of those mixed culture products that I used to make, it's dead, it's gone, but it can live on in the book, right? In that sense, you can immortalize your brewery, and so I think that's a good piece of it too.
I think that's really dope, man. I think it's very, very cool. Before we move on to the next beer and then a different topic, do you want to just pause for a sec and washroom break? I just feel like it's popping up. I'm just going to actually hit pause, and we'll be back in a sec. All right, back at it, fresh, ready for the next beer. Kelly, this one's going to be interesting. I think I still don't know what you have, but I got something fun. Talk to me.
All right, I got a big one, because I figured if we're going to go hard, the end one should be a good one.
You're right.
So Hair of the Dog in Portland, is one that I interviewed.
Okay.
And they only make hugely, ridiculously high alcohol beers.
Okay.
So this is Matt, which is it's bottle conditioned, 12-ounce bottle, 11.5% alcohol. I actually don't know what this one is, and so that's why I'm curious to drink it. I bought a whole bunch of shit from him when he closed down. So I interviewed him, and he closed the whole thing. So there he goes. Made with various dark malts, smoked grains, and candy sugar. It has notes of apple, chocolate, and gratitude. During the interview, it was an hour and a half long. I drank 3 of his beers, and I was fucked up. I'm not even kidding.
I love when that happens. So these guys, that sounds kind of almost like a double or something, like a very high ABV Belgian double or something with the candy sugar. I imagine
he has this cool business where he started in the 90s, and he had a small, I think it was 3.5 barrels or whatever, direct fire. So he did these high alcohol beers and just kind of not the way you're supposed to, but he made whatever he wanted. So all the different beers are they're not really a style, but they're kind of based on a style. And I don't think the dude made anything. He did make an IPA, which is probably under 10%, but everything else,
damn,
11, 12, 13. He'd make a barley wine. I think Doggy Claws is what that one's called. It was a beautiful beer. I've had so many high alcohol beers that were rushed fermentation or just somewhat out of balance, and everything I tasted from that guy, and I hate saying this, everything I tasted from that guy is great. I'm one of those people, I cannot stand it. That brewery does never make a bad beer, but they haven't had one yet. So
hey man, I'm here for it. So Portland, Oregon?
Yep.
Okay. And they're called Hair of the Dog is the brewery. Hair
of the Dog.
That's a dope name.
Alan Sprints. He's a bad motherfucker.
Okay, big ups. I'm curious to see what that looks like. I also chose a brewery for this one. I really feel like we aligned these perfectly, eh? I feel like our 3 beers that you didn't know, I don't think what I had. I definitely didn't know any of the ones that you had. I think we really nailed these up. You did your research, which I very much appreciated, by the way, that you went and listened to, you noticed that one of the recent episodes we were talking about, Barncat, which is a brewery here in Ontario that closed recently, and then you went and listened to the Barncat episode, which we're going to get into. So I figured, well, I didn't know that they made saisons or for farmhouse or mixed culture beers. They were known for haze primarily and for crispies and also stouts. So this is one of their final beers from the last like month called Cuvée, Matt and Jeremy, who are the two owners, and it's a blended ale with a saison and Flanders Red. So I'm a big Flanders Red fan, but I've never had any Barncats mixed ferms, so I'm excited to see how this goes. And
That's cool. So it's two different beers they blended together.
yeah, their stouts are just insane. Like I didn't want to do that right now because they're all like 12%. I was like, oh, it'll be over for me. So I was like, what do I have of Barncat that I can tap into that's reasonable? So I was like, you know what? I don't know about you because you own a brewery with mixed ferms, but I feel like the beer I drink the least that I have the most of is mixed ferms. For whatever reason.
Sucks. I don't drink it anymore. And I haven't yet addressed that. And I don't know if it's just sort of the pain and suffering of the industry, if it beat it out of me, but I don't reach for mixed culture. And I still have stuff in my cellar sitting in there. And I was actually going to open one tonight, and I decided, well, I guess I did do the one from Russian River, but
not one of. I mean, that's fair. It's a different situation from your side where it's it hits pretty close to home as far as drinking that stuff is directly bringing up rough memories there. So I don't know. Do you want to talk about Hair of the Dog, or should we go right into your insights into Barncat, which I thought were fascinating because you took note, bro? Just so people know. So Kelly listened to the episode, and you sent me like, I don't know, like a very sizable amount of notes and very thoughtful notes with quotes because Nate and I had Jeremy on the pod. It was at the old place, so a year and some change ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And
April when it was released.
There you go. Fuck, you know more than me. I'm so bad with dates. And you listened to it and you took notes as to what he said, and you listened to that episode with the hindsight, knowing that they closed, and you were able to maybe extrapolate and look into some of the things that he said, and maybe foresee some of the the outcomes from the things that he said. Is that accurate?
It is, and I would preface that by saying that, in a sense, he said a lot of the same things that I did, and a lot of the same things that I hear other people say. And so,
okay, so
by no means was his. Yeah, right.
Yeah, nobody knows more about this than you right now. You're like the foremost expert on breweries that are about to fucking close.
Yeah, how not to start a brewery.
Yeah, a damn brewery.
But it was interesting because I could sense a lot of those things. I definitely heard, when I heard what he was saying, I heard a guy who was trying. And so I would, again, like to say that I don't think that his future was set in stone by any means. And I'm sure that there were things that they could have done that might have kept them open. So, going through the interview and saying, hey, here were some red flags, is by no means saying that, Jeremy and Matt weren't doing it right or whatever. Just that these are some of the same problems I'm hearing over and over. And unfortunately, a lot of breweries that are going through this are going to end up in the same situation that they did. So.
I like that a lot. And I feel like it would be kind of like a testament to your work that if we reviewed these notes and just sort of like some of the pods. So for people who didn't know let me tell them which episode it was. So BAOS podcast, Barncat, Artisan, Ales. Just so I can tell people what episode is. Episode 134. So is that right? Oh no, that me and Nate did a farewell episode. I forgot about that. It's episode 95 of this particular series. A glass of yellow milk, it was called. So that's a specific episode. Yes, by the way, cheers.
Yeah, cheers. This beer is crazy.
Yeah, what is it in the end?
It's like syrup but not sweet.
Okay.
It's smoky, but it's nothing like a rock beer or whatever. It's just barely smoky, that's amazing. Like, I could just imagine I'm a huge red wine fan, and I would struggle to find, there are certain steaks that I would rather have this with than I would red wine for sure. So.
That's sick. Is the smoke coming through heavy, or is it kind of subtle?
Super light, which is almost, I mean, I wouldn't say impossible, but like no one can do it either. Like, oh, there's no smoke, or holy shit, dude, you got to back off. But yeah, this is perfect.
I love it. That's sick, because sometimes the smoke, if it depends on the, I guess, the malt and of the brewer, like, you know, and if you're also into that like campfire shit, the bacon thing, if it's used subtle enough, that Godspeed, funnily enough, do the best smoked beers I've ever had. They're just always so just subtle, and it's just in the
My
background.
favorite is like,
Go.
yeah, like this. When you drink it, you almost don't taste the smoke, but when you breathe in afterwards, that's when you get it. Where it's subtle enough that it's when the alcohol dries off your tongue that like, oh, there it is.
Yeah, that's I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, that's great. This is fantastic, by the way. It's sort of like, I guess, like a watered down Flanders Red, big and chewy. You know, that chewy kind of like thing that happens with mixed firms. I don't know if that's like the best word for it, but it's usually just this like thing that happens in your mouth that I really find works well. Yeah, and I guess it's just like they had the saison like water down the Flanders Red thing, but I did it came up, it was like yesterday, like 4 years ago in 2019, the brewmaster from Rodenbach came to Montreal because some company was bringing him out, and I had never had Rodenbach before. And
Really?
I fell in love with, yeah, I was just not really my thing. Like Belgian beers were, but a long time ago. So 2019, that was peak haze time for me. And I got to meet the dude. I had him on the pod. His name's Rudy. You know, I was like, and we had like this brewmaster lunch, and I sat right next to him. They put me right next to him in this lunch, and like to eat this, like it was this fancy French restaurant in Montreal, pairing all these crazy French food with like 3 of their beers that were being released in Quebec, and it just blew my fucking mind. Now Rodenbach Classic is one of my favorite beers of all time. So Flanders Red, I have this utmost appreciation for it. So I was actually quite excited to crack this because of the Flanders Red style. This is fucking great. I really overpoured it. It's like I've never seen it so close to the rim. I'm just gonna have to you have to top this bad boy up. Or it's gonna spill. Here we go. There we go. But this is fantastic. This is, right, professional. So, let's talk through the Badlands episode note. What's the best way to go about this, do you think? Some of the stuff that maybe talk us through your thinking and everything, and then we can actually go through the notes together and like some of the key moments that you identified.
Well, so I kind of went and organized them, and right out of the gates, he talks like the ESB they had released, and that was a big thing that was going on right then. And I don't think it's why you had him on the show, but it was definitely what he was leading with. And
Yes.
what he said a few things about that ESB, and as a haze brewery, it made me kind of rethink just my head kind of cocked to the side, right? And I'm like, what is the thought
What's going on?
process there?
Yes.
And one of the things he said, and he gets a lot, and I did the same thing, is he was selfishly trying to make classic styles a little bit hotter again, or maybe trendy, is how he worded it.
Okay.
And
Can I
that's
comment?
cool,
I can
right?
comment on that really
Yeah.
briefly. We have brought, when I say we, Nathan and I have brought this up on the pods since then, like a dozen times, because we were mind blown that the Hayes Brewery would send us an ESB as the first beer. When they do lagers and pilsners that are fantastic, and they chose an ESB to send to us, and I thought that was very telling. It was very interesting to me. And since then, multiple breweries have sent us ESBs as part of the lineup.
Really?
And we absolutely credit, I don't know if they saw the Barncat one and they were like, oh, we should do that too. Because they truly were trendsetters. Like they really were, just so you understand the level of impact. Like the best breweries in like Badlands and Third Moon, particularly in this province, as far as the haze stuff goes, worship Barncat. They started everything. And Third Moon even bought one of their fermenters that they were, they actually did the opposite to you. They're selling all the stuff off piecemeal. And them sending that ESB was very, very impactful on me personally. I don't know if I credit that specifically, but it's definitely in the conversation of one of the reasons I love ESBs. And I couldn't believe that that's what they sent. Like, I just couldn't believe it. It was so wild to me. So that's just like, it was a very big thing, and I think it maybe was important to them that they were known potentially for more than just the haze and the stouts. They have a stout called Rat Queen, and they got 800 million variants of it, and it's exceptional. It's got to be one of the best stouts I've ever had. Every version I've had. So anyway, that was the context there with that ESB. It was just it was a very left field move, and we were taken aback by it at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, well, so what I again, the more I go through this podcast, and I did a lot of those same things at my brewery. We used, the old joke, right? Like we drink what we can and we sell the rest.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, that's cute on paper, but we all know the biggest brewers in the world aren't sitting in boardrooms having conversations like that. If they say, I want to make ESB big again, there's $1 billion budget behind it, because if that marketplace doesn't currently exist, changing consumer demand is exceptionally expensive. And so you could say they got lucky, and maybe they did, but then here's the other problem, and unfortunately you brought that up. The second they did it, copycats abound. And so let's say there were 1,000 drinkers of ESB at the time, and Jeremy's like, dude, we're going to make this. And Matt goes, you know what? I can make it badass. And they did. They made the best fucking ESB in the fucking, where are you at? Quebec? Ontario? I forgot what you said.
Ontario.
Ontario.
Same
and
shit.
Because of that, now there's 1,400 people who drink that beer. So they expanded the market. Maybe they go to 2,000. But 7 other breweries all release them right behind them and have the same Instagram following and the same relationships with the LCBO. They're not getting that now. The 1,000 that they went after, there's 2,000 split 7 ways. They've actually got less. And so at the end of the day, they're not going to make any money. And so I get it. I also selfishly like to make beer that I wanted to see. But as a business moving forward, those are the kinds of decisions that unfortunately don't help you stay in business. So that would be my insight, I guess, is why I noticed that when he was talking about it. And I felt terrible because ESB is also my favorite style of beer. And there's only one made in Texas I like, and they do not distribute. You have to go to the brewery, and I do whenever I can, but you just don't see it a lot.
Interesting. That's a very good point. And honestly, I was about to give you some more context about a bunch of things, but then I realized that, like, he kind of said almost everything you needed to know in the pod. And then when I reviewed your notes, you kind of said it all. So I don't think I need to even tell you anything about their business model. I think you could extrapolate their business model from that conversation as we keep going. If there's anything I feel like maybe just for context that would be helpful, I'll bring it up. But I kind of feel like you might have like nailed this without even knowing basically jack shit about this brewery, which is dope.
Well, I did find one video of Matt and Jeremy talking, and I don't know what it was on, but like I listened to one video, so I got to see the brewery, saw the size of the fermenters, so I did get a little bit of background info from that too. But
okay, perfect.
This is what I do all day. I just sit around and pick apart businesses. I apologize, but it's a hobby. It's a sickness. Yeah.
Hey man, that's what we're here for. That's what we're doing tonight. Let's go.
But again, I thought one of the other telling things, and I hear this one a lot too, is I think you asked what was the response, or maybe it was
Nate,
the other guy, but yeah, I think maybe it was Nate. And Jeremy literally said, "I think a lot of people are excited."
Okay.
And at that moment, I literally felt for him, like I wanted to give him a hug, and I was just like, "Dude, I get it. That's cool, but like, that is not a KPI. It's not a metric, and that is not a reason to decide to make it again. Was it profitable? Did it create new clients, or did it just cannibalize your existing brands? Like, what was the impact of making that beer, and how did it impact your business, and how are you going to pivot using that recipe and what you've learned from it going forward?" And I think a lot of people are excited is unfortunately not the answer to that question.
That's a great point. That's a really good point. So you're looking at this, by the way, just for context as well, as sort of like to analyze maybe if there's any signs of, a year and a half before they close, like a little less even, were there any signs that maybe things were going to wind down? And also, by the way, the reason they closed in the end was the landlord put the lease up, the rent up. And it was to the point where it was unsustainable. And if they were to move, it would probably cost them as much as setting up a brand new brewery to move and to dig the fucking the floors and blah, blah, blah. So they called it a day. That was why. But you're seeing some signs before that moment, that because if a landlord said that and everything was going great, you'd be like, all right, well, we'll move, cool, we'll just figure it out. But you're seeing a bunch of things where you're sort of noticing that maybe things weren't where they needed to be to make this a thriving business as such.
Yeah, so what that sounds like to me is throwing darts at a board that we're trying to figure out. Because if at the end of the day, if your tanks were full and you were making hazy IPAs and you could switch from Galaxy to Idaho 7 and people would still buy just as much of it, there's no reason to fill your tank with an ESB. And if you do that, probably aren't making as much on the ESB, curiously, but I don't know their sales prices, but it's not a beer typically that people are willing to pay big money for a 4-pack of in 16-ounce cans.
Mm.
And so to your point though, I've had this happen many times, and this is again part of the podcast where when somebody says, well, here's why we closed, I get very like my butthole literally tightens up. And the reason is it's never one fucking reason, bro. Like, I get it, the rent went up, okay, and that's true, and that sucks, and that's a piece of it. But if you were making $150,000 a year and the landlord goes, hey, rent last year was $40,000, I want 70, you'd be like, fuck, that sucks. I have it, I'll pay it, but I need to find a way to expand or make more money. Or again, if you're making 150 grand a year and your landlord says, I want to go up to whatever, you can just take the excess capacity, because we all have 9 months of operating capital in our account, and borrow money to open a bigger facility, expand your market share, and probably be the most successful brewery in the country. So it wasn't just that the landlord raised the rent. It was, again, in my opinion, not being the guy with the P&L, it was that the landlord raised the rent and that was the final straw, is a better way. That's more what I would see. And I've had that conversation. I think that was Second Self in Atlanta. That's basically what happened with them. The landlord, they would had 18,000 square feet. Landlord goes, hey, the rent's coming up and I want to 3X it. And they were like, we're not making money now. We're not doing that.
Yeah.
And the last person that went in to shop for it, Jason actually told me that the landlord was quoting them 5x, 5X. So it was like $60,000 a month. Anyways.
Okay.
Back to Barncat.
Fucking hell. Okay.
But, another thing that I struggle with this one because I get it. I think they were having fun. I think that was the whole idea, but like, I deleted this note twice actually, and I put it back in. The fact that they copied Fuller's branding, like just blatantly, I can't get my head around that one.
A lot of breweries here do it. A lot of breweries here do that. It's not uncommon.
Creative though. Like, make your own shit.
How do I explain it then? There's one brewery here called Blood Brothers, and they did a beer called Blood Light, and originally it looked exactly like Bud Light. They got the C&D from...
Oh, I heard about this. Yeah. Oh, you talked about it.
Yeah, those guys are fucking champions, and they were laughing about it. They were like, they even pitched them a collab, and they said no, but they changed it from then. So it was like the breweries that aren't distributing, like Barncat, are a little more cheeky about stuff like that. And I wouldn't put it down to laziness or not creative. It was more just like that was maybe their inspiration. So like, let's just do a little thing, because the volume is so small. The impact on them, the chances of that getting the attention of Fuller's and getting a cease and desist is so minuscule that if they did, they'd be like, there's 20 cases of this shit, bro. Like, I don't care. Sure, it's already sold. Like, it's not going to happen again. You're good. So it's like the risk was minimal. I think that's where they were coming from, and just more like they might not have ever done it again. I don't know if they did. I don't know if I ever saw it around. I moved here like 3 months after that pod. I don't think I ever saw that beer again, if I'm honest with you. So that would be why, like, and it's not uncommon here. I've seen it so many times. So it's more just, I think it's like a little cheeky little, like, fucking nudging, poking the beast type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to be disagreed with, but I can say with 100% honesty, it's one of my biggest pet peeves that,
Fair enough,
especially in the States, stealing Disney IP or fucking Nintendo IP. It's just like it exhausts me. So the answer brew pub can eat the biggest fucking dick. Make
Oh, in
your own
Richmond?
glassware. Like, yeah, everybody just steals IP and it just bugs the shit on me. So I don't
Totally,
know.
man. I get it. I'm not excusing it. I was just more sort of like context. I don't think it's
Yeah.
whatever. I don't really care. It doesn't bother me. But I have pet peeves and other things. So I totally respect it, brother. No, it's totally cool. I
I'm very
definitely say,
childish too, so
it's on my bro. It's who cares? We out here. We're drunk. Let's go. We drink it.
yeah.
You got 11.5%. Let's go.
So then he talks about having to make a wheat wine for a sixth anniversary, and I don't think, again, not one of these things by themselves is like a red flag, but for me, the type of beer that people won't drink a lot of, that is not a style that's going to move. I don't see the logic in it, and so if I'm trying to get attention that I can maintain past the anniversary or something that's going to live on in a revenue producing way. So he even talks later in the interview about how, like, barley wine's the same thing. He wishes more people would buy it. They keep making it, but it's not really doing revenue. And I think that kind of thing, for me, when I look at it, the breweries that make something that people can drink all day and do, like, this is a problem you run into a lot. So when you go to a bar, they'll have these big beers and these big kind of like high alcohol, big flavor things that you really just can't order seven of. The
Yes.
ticket for what you spend, the actual dollar figure that you give on your credit card, your Canadian one because you don't have an American credit card, just isn't enough to move the needle
Yet.
on a regular basis. So if I'm thinking about how do I make my sixth anniversary the most profitable event I possibly can, I need a beer people can drink a lot of. I want to have high tickets. And how do I do that? I don't do that with the wheat wine. And that's, again, something I've learned maybe since, but definitely a red flag in my opinion.
An interesting one. I see that point, and I think it's valid for the 7th anniversary, which I guess was around the same time this year. They did a blend, and this is something that's become popular here that I fucking love. It's a barley wine imperial stout blend. So they just called it 7th, 7. And then they did a single barrel and they did a double barrel version. And I have them both, but I haven't had the double. I haven't had either yet. I had both the 6 one because they did a maple wheat wine and then one in a one with maple and vanilla, I think. And they were dope. And I'm more newer to barley wines. Like I used to like them back in the day. Then I hated them for a while. Then I got back into them. But these blends, apparently, one of my friends from Quebec gets me to get all the stuff for him from here, and he bought so much. He's probably spent $1,000 through me, and most of that has been barley wine and like the blends and stuff. It's bonkers. Most of it's Barncat and Third Moon, and it's pretty crazy. So like they do a lot of that. I think this time maybe they learned from the wheat wine thing, and they did a barley wine stout blend because they know that their stout is what everybody is excited about, typically speaking. And
you kind of pull that cachet into the new beer, and if you like that, you should try this. And
it's a little bit less, if you're not a barley wine person, it's like, have you had many barley wine stout blends? Is it a thing in Texas?
So, no, it's so funny you mentioned that. The episode that's going to be the season opener for the next season, which will probably be 2 weeks from now, or I don't know when this comes out, but was a big guy I wanted to interview, and the first beer I ever had from him was that. It was a blend of a barley wine and a imperial stout, and that was Lost Abbey in San Diego. Ooh. When I first went there in 2011. It was a beautiful beer. That's the only one I've ever had.
Oh, I've had a couple Lost Abbey beers and they're exceptional, and this will come out in 2 weeks' time as well, so probably time up very perfectly.
Perfect.
And they are just, I don't know, the ones I've had here, I've only had like 2 or 3, and they're just so, one of them's from Godspeed, actually. Third Moon did one, like Bar Canada in Quebec did one, and I've got a bunch in the cellar that are just, I'm so excited to crack them because they're just so good. So I think they may have learned from that wheat wine because it's very like, not super exciting. Whereas, like, they were quite known. The barley wine world, like that hashtag barley wine is life, from Don't Drink Beers and stuff. Very hyper niche. Like you said earlier, niche within a niche within a niche. I think that's that. And they were probably leaning into that, and I think that was Barncat's kind of like appeal, was that they were the first at haze. They did some of the best imperial stouts. They did some of the best barley wines, and very few people gave a flying fuck. And maybe that was part of their problem, is that they were doing things that maybe those two dudes really loved, and that the beer drinking, you know, population at large just didn't get excited about. You know, it's difficult to build a business off something that a lot of people aren't keen on, and, you know, making lagers here and there, and their haze. The other problem, by the way, before they mentioned, is that the haze was, you know, we're talking about before, like cyclical. It was very rare they'd do a one-off. They'd bring back the same ones time and time again, as opposed to doing a new one every week. So whilst they were the pioneers of it in Ontario and arguably in Canada, they didn't sort of play into that, you know, oh, every Friday there's 3 more drops. They didn't do that. They brought back the same ones, you know. And I think in a scene where in the beginning it wasn't that big a deal, you could have the same one over and over because there wasn't many choices. When the choice started to grow, that would be harder and harder to compete against. And they only started canning a few years ago. They were doing growlers up until then. So me in Quebec, I barely got a taste of Barncat. I think the first time was probably like 2018, 2019. They started in long time ago. So they were really hard to get. They were like the bucket list thing for me. They were so hard to get. And because they're actually pretty close to me now, like where they were is like 30, 45 minutes away. But from Quebec, it's like 6-7 hours drive. And you couldn't just go pick me up some cans and ship them to me. It was a growler. It was very difficult to go and pick it up and ship and have that be in any sort of state of drinkability. So just giving you a bit more context for the conversation. Please continue this analysis, because this is fantastic.
Well, it's actually a note that I didn't make, but I remember he did talk about that. They used a mobile canner in 2020 to can the products, and, you know, I do drink, so I forgot, because I knew they did growlers up until then. I don't know their price points, but the price per ounce, I can guarantee you, selling the growler was way more beneficial than selling the cans. And then the labor to produce the cans, paying the mobile canner. So mistake number 5 in my book is don't ever use a fucking mobile canner. And so they're a terrible investment. And that's unfortunately been borne out more and more. And nothing against mobile canners. They're obviously people trying to make money as well as anybody else. But for a brewery, particularly if you go into distribution and you've done mobile canning, most of them wind up learning that they lost money completely, and they didn't make any money at all. So,
yeah, that was a big thing in COVID, and prior to COVID, it was just the smaller breweries that did it, who didn't want to drop $300K on a canning machine, which I understand. That would be why, but I think it was more like around the time because they'd done growlers for so long and they wanted to maybe get their footprint out a little wider. That was one way, because they were just this hyper local thing that only the people around there, in an area called Cambridge. Once again, it's like 30, 45 minutes from here. It's, you know, I've been there like once or twice ever. Still never got to the brewery before they closed. So it was, yeah, I think that was just why I was starting to do it. And the first like one I got, I think in cans, was like a triple IPA. And personally, I don't like triple IPAs. They're too much for me. 10% on an IPA is like, Jesus Christ, like relax.
That's a lot.
It's a lot, but it was one of the best ones I'd ever had, because they were so good with the haze, like just so good. Anyways, please continue. This is great.
Yeah, so then you talked about doing the lagers, and that's another one kind of like on the same timeline or same profit incentive. He literally said, we wanted to be drinking lagers for a long time, so eventually we're just like, you know, let's just try it and see how it's received. Again, I did this as well, but unfortunately, what you're saying there is not profit driven. And so if at the end of the day you're like, hey, this is a beer that we like, it may very well not be profitable. It may very well not resonate with your existing clientele. And so if you're trying to get new clientele, then you typically need new distribution and or new points of distribution. So, and of course, he says in the summer, it's selling extremely well, quote unquote. But you know what I want to hear is, excuse me, we did 3 batches of it and we sold all of them out the first weekend, or
right.
but unfortunately, what you find with lagers, if you're a haze guy, stuff leaves your brewery in 3 weeks. So if you're doing lagers correctly, you're probably double that. Your profit on that batch is probably 40% less, maybe even more than that, or
Then
less than that.
haze.
Correct. And
Why?
so, because there's no hype on the, and granted, your market might be a little bit different. Maybe there's enough hype that you can charge enough for pills and for crispy boys, but typically the price points are low because that's you're in that space, right? That lager space with the lower alcohol. You can't do the same volume with it or same profit per volume.
I think that's accurate here. I don't think lagers are. If someone's charging out the ass for lagers, like it's not going to work. You got to tone it down a little bit.
Right. So you're playing in a space that, AB dominates in, and, Miller, all these guys, they're just killing it. And to be honest, they don't make as interesting of products. They don't make as good of products, but particularly from a distribution standpoint, and obviously Barncat didn't quite have to deal with this at the LCBO, but you try to go into there with that kind of product, and if you don't have huge tanks and are able to amortize out your expense costs over it, so that's an extreme example. But when you shrink it down, they can. So I put this in the book in two different sections. Is your tank space has to be amortized into the cost of the beer that you produce. And so if it takes you twice as long to make a pills and you can't make twice the profit, shouldn't have done it. Especially
Gotcha.
when they open, they only have 4 tanks. Like obviously at that point it'd be even worse, but
That makes sense.
are you dying?
I just swallowed the wrong way, and it's like sharp carb on this like mixed firm thing. So I'm like, oh, I hate that when it happens. That's good. No, that makes complete
Never
sense.
breathe acid.
Never. That's what I'm doing right now. Breathing acid. Fucking hell. But it's glorious acid. God damn it. No, that makes complete sense. And I feel like their lagers were something they did down the track. I think they almost, if I'm not mistaken, probably did majority haze up front with some of the stouts and some barley wines. Predominantly stouts. The barley wines were fewer and further between, but when they did, apparently they were just exceptional. Like Nate, my co-host, talks about this one called Green Out that they did many times, and he was holding out hope when they announced they were closing. They gave it maybe 2 months notice, and then they dropped a whole bunch of beers. I actually kept the can for this one. This was actually, funnily enough, it's not. This says Eminence, which is one of the beers, but they ran out of labels, so it's actually called the last one. It's printed on the bottom. So I kept this can because it's their last IPA ever, and this was their last beer ever, called the Final Boss.
I saw that on their Instagram. Yeah.
So I made sure I kept one of those to keep that. But I think that was like they started with basically those two things, the haze and the stouts, and then kind of dabbled in, and then maybe moved into the lagers and stuff because that's what they were into. So I think that they approached. My camera died, but I'm gonna change the battery and it'll keep going. I think that they formulated the brewery after their own personal interests, which isn't uncommon. Maybe not the wisest move, but I think they have a cult following, or had a cult following, and a very dedicated, very passionate cult following. And that's what made them who they were. Because they, the breweries like Third Moon and Badlands are just like in awe of them and devastated that they had ended. Like Badlands just did their about a month ago had their anniversary, 6th anniversary I think, and they did a collab with Barncat, which I have in the fridge, like a triple IPA. I think it was one of the probably basically the last thing that Barncat would ever release now, because it was so far after they finally closed. And they always had a Barncat collab. It was always just one of the things that any brewery worth their salt in Ontario would have a Barncat collab, because that's how fucking dope they are. That's
Well,
how
and I think that's a
meaningful
lot
it
of
is.
what the sadness comes from too. Is
Yeah.
I got a lot of hate in the very beginning of the podcast early on because there were a lot of reasons, but part of it was that people didn't want to accept that, or didn't want to admit, didn't want to be popular, that what I was saying was true. And I think there's no doubt that when a brewery like Barncat goes out of business, some of the fun leaves the industry. Some of what inspires us to get excited about beer, to meet the brewers and the guys that make it and the dudes who like sweat all fucking day to make this really cool thing. If they aren't able to make it, what are we doing? And there's some of that. And so I understand that I'm a buzzkill in that way and that the podcast is definitely contributing to that. I don't want a brewery like Barncat to go away either. I just unfortunately can see the lack of viability in that business model, I guess.
I think it makes sense, and we're at a point in time where being real is probably valuable, and being real with ourselves. Like, if you even look at the the state of the economy and everything the way that it is, like, look, man, we just gotta be like, look, it's just shit is fucked up. You're 100% right in saying that, like, a brewery like Barncat going is just, it's rough. The morale side of it is just like, for the breweries themselves, I can only imagine with those guys, because I knew, I'd spoken to Matt on text and I had Jeremy on the podcast, but that was kind of as far as it went. But these other guys, I know the Third Moon guys and Badlands guys well, and they seem pretty fucking devastated. So I think that it definitely hurt. All the cats who were in their caliber of brewery didn't take it super well. And it was probably hurt their morale, and I'm sure they're all shook within themselves about the economic impact of everything, and then seeing the folks who were leading the way wrap it up. It's like, ooh, that's not good. I can only imagine how they felt.
We've been talking way more recently in the States, at least, about sort of the burnout in the industry and like the long hours, the lots of drinking, the bad health or whatever. And this is sort of plays right into that, where it's like, dude, if the fun leaves the industry, why am I doing it?
What do we
And
got?
so some of that, yeah, I mean, some of that for those people is like, hey, we're also really struggling. We're also trying to figure out if we have a bad quarter, maybe we're done. And so I think it hits harder in that sense because it kind of makes you wake up from the dream. And
Yeah.
again, I hate being that guy, but at the end of the day, somebody has to. So
I mean, look, you're doing it for altruistic reasons, I think. Like, I think you're a good dude with good intentions, and you're really trying to analyze your own situation, and by doing that, you're providing answers to everybody else who are in it, and maybe they could make some pivots enough to avoid some downfalls once your book comes out. So I feel like that book is going to be like a textbook, like guaranteed reading type shit. Like, I'm excited for you on this. I know once again that the topic doesn't seem the most optimistic, but I really believe that I see the intentions behind it. I just think it's so valuable, dude. And maybe, it's gonna make an impact on the brewery. We'll keep going on this, but I just think what you're doing is not trying to bring anybody or anything down. It's more just like, all right, this is the real. We have to just be real. We can't delude ourselves. Like, we just can't. Like, shit's fucked everywhere. Cool. So how do we get by the shit fucked era? Let's get by it. Let's figure out how not to fail. How about that? That's where we start. Like, not even about how to succeed, because it's so easy. That's everywhere. But how not to fail. That's what you're doing. You're fulfilling a niche, and that's why I think it's so dope, and that's why I want to have this conversation with you. So this is extra fascinating because you analyzed a long podcast that we had and took all these quotes and then did this. This is super dope, and I think this is really valuable. So I want to keep cruising through this, man. So we'll talk about the lagers, talk about the barley wine. Keep going.
So one of the other things, and I have done this before, but he wanted to make a triple IPA. That was the first thing they were going to put in cans, and
it was triple Simcoe.
He was shopping for hops and found last year's Simcoe at half price. I was like, well, let's use double Simcoe. So again, I've done this, but this is a risk because if he had, based on how he was explaining it, he did not do a test batch of a double triple Simcoe. He bought all the hops, threw it in, ran with it, and who knows? Maybe when alcohol gets to 9%, Simcoe pulls out cat piss and shit. I don't know, right? Like, he got lucky that it turned out to be a good beer. Yes. Because at that point he'd already pot committed. He was going to make, and I've done that. I did that with one of the beers that was the last one that I kind of was like a last ditch effort. Maybe I stay alive if this happens, and it wasn't good. And I was like, all right, I'm out. But anyways, so red flag.
I feel you. No, that's totally. I'm just checking now. It's 10.5%. I had it in May 2018. I had that beer. So that was when my friend Nate, actually, before he was hosting the pod, got me a can of that beer. And
He loved it. He said, "I thought."
yeah, and it was I loved it. And I don't like triple IPAs because I'm more of a lower ABV guy unless it's like a barrel aged stout or something like that. I just don't really have bandwidth for that. I like volume for the most part because I want to try different things. I find it's more entertaining. And but it was such a great beer, and I was so stoked at the time to get Barncat. I actually think that was my first Barncat beer ever. Was that Triple Simcoe?
Really?
And I remember it being like what did I give it on Untapped? I think I gave it a. I'm very generous typically because I just posited 4.5 out of 5 on Untapped here. But like a lot of people gave it, ones here I'm seeing, dude, do it like 4.75, 4.75. Like, people are really, they were that good though. And I'm not bullshitting. Like they were that fucking good. And no one was doing what they were doing before they were doing it. And everybody else that came after them were just trying to replicate what they did. That's what level of pioneers and sort of like legends they were, and why that hurt so much that they, didn't make it through.
Yeah.
But
Who knows what the future holds too? Maybe they could reopen sometime. But yeah, for now.
Let's see. I mean, we can only hope. Someone did tell me that they said that I never spoke to them directly about it, but someone who spoke to them told me that they were like going back to other industries and they were like, "Fuck this," which is probably smart. But anyways, yes, the corn stuff, right? You were talking about.
Yeah, well, I thought that was interesting. It was a small notice, but he said he used flake corn mainly to make the color lighter, but also because it has less flavor than barley. But that also, like, flake corn's going to add, it changes the body. It's going to change the flavor in another way. And I don't know. I just thought that was, again, but I was going through making notes. That was my least interesting one. But I thought that, and maybe Matt's more the recipe guy, but.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I actually don't know who did what from memory. I can't remember if Jeremy was a brewer too.
Yeah.
I'm always drunk during these pods, so I never remember shit.
Always.
You know how it goes.
You sound like it. I could tell. Yeah.
I'm just lit. It's just like I don't know. You have like 3-4 hour conversation with people. And I just can't remember nuances of it all. Like I know that I liked the person and we had a good time, but I don't remember like all the intricate details. I wish I did. Mine doesn't work that way, unfortunately. But I'm glad.
It was a long conversation.
I know it was a year and a half ago, and lots have happened. So, no, that's fair. That is fair. Well, I don't know if that flaked corn made it. He was saying he had flaked corn in the hazy IPAs.
In that triple.
Okay. Well, I don't recall. And it probably gave it like a little bit of a lighter body because you could imagine a triple IPA typically has these big, creamy, like overly, thick, intense bodies. So maybe some flake corn kind of like lightens it up just a touch. Not mad at it, particularly if like the punchiness isn't lost because they probably double, triple dry hop that thing.
No, and it could have been a fantastic recipe. I've never heard anybody else doing that, so I have no idea. But just was an interesting way of how he described it.
Good call out.
The one that really I thought was the most telling, in my opinion, as the guy who's paying the rent, reading the P&Ls, trying to figure out the next way in. Jeremy seemed very concerned about having been the first to do things.
Okay.
And again, not wrong. And if he was, he should be able to maybe, there are people there was a brewery in San Antonio that had first to can written on their cans. And they thought that was like cool, like around the rim.
Yeah.
And I think that they released those cans and they may have made it 18 months and they went out of business. Like, first to do a thing, it's a badge of honor. It's not wrong. But when he mentions it repeatedly throughout the whole thing, it seems to be, well, put it this way. He mentions being the first to do something 3 times. He never once mentions the most to be profitable or the highest range of distribution or makes the most of it or gets the best ratings on Untapped or won an award. And I had the same argument with the brewery that made a pickle beer after I made my pickle beer, and I lost the argument. It doesn't matter who's first. Like, whoever has the most distribution wins. It's a revenue game. So
that's a good point. I can see that in hindsight because the question came up, and the question comes up a lot about who did haze first in Ontario, and I thought it was Sawdust City's Juicin, which is what you referred to here in your notes, and they were saying that their one was first because Sawdust was in like October, and they were like in April of 2016, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken. Or was it 15? Let me check. I'm gonna check your notes.
He released April 2016 is when he said
Cool.
he has.
Okay, so the one I thought was the first was October 2016. So Sawdust City's a brewery we've done a couple of collabs with here. So yeah, from what I understand, they were the first based on what Jeremy said. And there's some pride to be taken for being the first. I mean, like, you gotta understand the difference between like the states. You guys are sort of leading the way, leading the charge with craft beer and the trends and all that type of stuff. So when you're in a different market, for the ones to be paying attention, particularly at that time, if you think back to 2016 when things were very, very different. Like, I hung out with Sean Hill a month ago. He's a fucking champion. We hung out with him for like an hour and a half at the brewery, and even he was saying like he essentially, from what I understand, started the haze thing, and then Nate from Treehouse was coming to his events and basically copied kind of what he did, and then Trillium and so on and so forth. So like, seeing like the OGs of like haze, and I'm just trying to trace the history of it through this podcast and just trying to get the answers to like who was first. Not that someone's superior, but just like the history, just to document it here. And in Canada, if you look at that, if Sean Hill did it, I think he said it was like 2011, 2010, something absurd, like a long time ago, that he did like Susan. There was like a kind of almost like looking more like this, like it's like slightly opaque, even before Hetty and stuff like that, because he worked. John Kimmich was his mentor at.
Well, my understanding is that Hetty was 08.
So Hetty was a Vermont IPA, and Hetty and Sean worked with John. But I think that maybe, I don't know, because that's a Vermont IPA. That was the precursor, because I think that was before Super Sunshine from Lawson. That was the precursor to the New England IPA, which, from what Sean told us off the record, like hanging out, not on a pod. I want to have him on. I was talking to him today, actually, on email, and maybe something next year if all works out. But I'd like to get him on the record just saying, like, this is the order as far as he's concerned, because all I want to do is what I got Jeremy saying, this is what happened.
That'd be cool.
You know what I'm saying? Just getting the different cats on, like, this is what happened. Boom, boom, boom. That's all I want to do, is because I don't know. I just want to get to the truth of it, and all I can do is ask the question of all the different players involved. I'd love to have everybody on at different times and just figure it out, but that is what I understand, that potentially Sean might have been the one who accidentally, had too many, he said, like, polyphenols in the fucking hops and the blah, blah, blah. That resulted in that sort of opaque look, which wasn't really typical, because the Vermont IPA was kind of like that, and this took it to like a slightly next level. And then I always thought Treehouse and Trillium were the ones to really like do it in like 2014, 15. But anyway, being a Canadian brewery doing that in 2016 is no small thing. So I think that's probably potentially why he was proud of being the first one here. I'm not familiar with any other provinces, because I was really just, between Quebec and Ontario. So that's all really I know about as far as historically. But that could be the long-winded version of of why he's sort of, proud and wanted to insist upon that.
Yeah, and I don't think it's at all wrong. And I think if he was first, that he deserves the medal, right? But I guess I kind of think of it this way. If he was doing $100 million a year, and the guy who like lost to him by a month and a half or whatever was doing 800 grand, like, he'd be like, bro, it's cool, you can have it. Like, I don't even care. Like, we're both making hazies and whatever. I think, from my perspective, when I hear stuff like that, I'm like, man, that guy's just, he's not rich yet. He's not, in his mind, successful yet. And but he does have those medals, and those are wins. And so, again, I'm not taking away from him. I was just looking at it from the perspective of, I saw kind of like a struggle in my opinion based on that. So
no, I think this is extra interesting, to be honest, for you to notice that. And I think that's more interesting that maybe that's what they were focusing on at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's cool.
Yeah,
I like that. Okay.
So then when I looked them up again, they had four 7 barrel fermenters and no tasting room in the beginning. And I understand it sounds like they had some laws that prevented them from being able to have an actual on-site consumption tasting room.
Probably just a permit. They just didn't get the right
And
permit in time. And I think they, if I'm not mistaken, they had a tasting room for a period of time. It could have been COVID that shut them down. Then they were like, just fuck it and never bothered to continue again. I don't know for sure.
yeah, but even just the space, like we all kind of opened with less than we needed, and more I'm realizing that you just can't. Like the idea of like proof of concept, and then 3 to 5 years later, I'm just going to get new money and expand. That's just not happening now. And when they opened, it kind of was legitimate, but at the same time, unfortunately, as they progressed, it became I don't say impossible, but not really with the way it's working. And so to me, that's as I did. That's like approaching it more like a home brewer, which is what they were, more so than an MBA, who's like, okay, how do we maximize the investment of these 4 tanks? When we put in three more, what is seven going to give us, and what does that revenue look like? I don't. I don't think the way they were selling that there's any reality in which 4 to 7 fermenters at 7 barrels was going to make them money, and they probably found that out. It's part of the reason that they ended up closing.
A lot of people said that too. It was the tasting room plus just not expanding, growing volume or anything like that really sort of allowed them to get where they needed to be. Plus also the sort of, they went into distro, aside from the small independent bottle shops, which like I was saying earlier, only really became legal over the last couple of years. They weren't doing LCBO, they weren't doing anything major, they were just doing their little local guys. So it's almost like, to me as a business owner, it came across like they weren't even trying. Maybe they were, but it felt like they were just like wanting to be that sort of like under the radar, mysterious, you could only go there and get growlers type of cats that kind of flew back when they started. But then over time, as things changed, it didn't really work, and they didn't really follow the times as far as that's concerned. And then not innovating, they were innovating and doing a whole lot of fun barrel stuff, but that was like must be only a fraction of their, you can only produce so much barrel stuff. Whereas like the Hayes are doing the same ones over and over, and people just lost excitement when Third Moon and Badlands, Willowbold, fucking all these different breweries were just doing fun shit every week, and they were like, well, why would I get the same Badlands that I've had 7 times? Barncat I've had 7 times, when I'm like, I could get these 3 brand new beers that's never been tried before. So I think that kind of bit him in the ass a little bit.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like and to their credit, that at least Jeremy, and Matt was on the show, but at least Jeremy had sort of decided what he wanted to do, and this is how I want my business to run, and this is what I want it to be, and this is what I want to drink and what I want to make. And unfortunately, it wasn't viable for the industry and for the marketplace, and it wasn't supported in whatever way it needed to be by the consumers. But he didn't want to change, and that is something I'm seeing more and more, hearing more and more. Judd, most recently at Dos Luces in Denver, he was like, no, I know exactly what it will take to fix it, but I don't want to fucking go work there. And so if I need to make these changes in my brewery to make it profitable, I'd rather go get a desk job doing something else. That's not where I want to work. And I mean, I get that. Like, that's kind of what I did.
It. Yeah. I respect it, man. You got to know what you want out of life, and if you got into the beer thing, you want to do it a certain way, and maybe you had to learn the hard way that it isn't profitable and it's not going to make it work, then tough shit. And maybe that's what these guys did too. Maybe these guys were just like, this is how we roll. Oh, it's not going to work. Well, it's been fun. Like,
Peace
I get
out.
it. Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm not mad at you for that, because I feel like that's knowing what you want out of life, and I respect that highly, because that takes almost more balls to do that than it does to kind of pivot and figure it out. You're just like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that at all. I'm like, all right, whether it's for me or not, like the fact that that's what you wanted out of this, and then maybe there was no way to realize that isn't financially viable except to try it.
Yeah. And then you have the guy whose beer I was just drinking in Portland, the hair of the dog. He was like, I go, why didn't you sell it? He goes, dude, you really think that some asshole I'm gonna let come in and completely destroy the beer that I've been making for 25 years and ruin my legacy? Oh, fuck that. Like, all right, I get that.
Can't be
But
mad.
what if he wants 1.5 million? He's like, nah, I don't care. I own the building. I made money. I'm okay. Like, all right.
I respect the non-greed, particularly in the States in a capitalist society, that people aren't that greedy. I think that people in beer, the vast majority, aren't that greedy. I think there are some that are, but I think most people that I talk to, and now that you're a similar cat to me, that you talk to a lot of people as well, there's a lot of people I meet that just like, oh, we want to grow slowly. It's almost like they bought themselves a job. Like they don't want to go
Mm-hmm.
too crazy, just want to be able to pay my rent and like do my shit and just brew the beers every day. And that's what they want to do. That's the casual life they've bought themselves. They don't give a fuck about blowing up distribution. Just keep the shit going and they're good. I'm like, oh man, like, I don't know. I feel like I'm more of a capitalist personally. I have larger aspirations, so that would have worked for me. But I'm not mad at the people who are true to themselves and that's what their business represents. Like you can't, I can't be mad at somebody if that's what they want out of the situation they got themselves in. You know,
I would agree, except for one caveat,
please.
because I'm one of the guys that helps you kind of like build that model and how you're gonna pay for it. As long as if grandma's an investor, she's cool and you tell her the truth about that.
I
So
agree with that for sure.
if you're bringing on investors, bank loans, whatever, and the idea is like, no, 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 we're gonna have a great, 2027 as our year, but you have no intention of making money or any like, plan for that. I just think you got to be honest and with yourself as well. So,
I could not agree more with that as well. Like I think that's like absolute like that would be included in that. Like if you're getting people to invest, you have to be like straightforward with your intentions behind it. Yeah, I was about to say like maybe if you do have that kind of like chill intention behind it, then maybe you shouldn't get investors because it's probably not fair if they're going to be lucky to get their money back.
wineries do it all the time. I don't know.
Wineries a different conversation, I guess, because they have the breweries can like turn a profit like that. Wineries need to have vines growing for X number of years before they can make anything at all, any sort of viable product. We've spoken to a lot of wineries because of my girlfriend Tiffany's like Liquid X Happiness accounts where we've talked to, we know we've got a few friends who own wineries now because of all of this and hearing what they have to say, I'm like, oh man, you think beer's hard? Fucking hell. And wine aren't even trying to, for the most part, to attract a younger audience. They're only aiming at this older thing. They're fucking dying, bro. What do you think? Aim at these younger cats. Like maybe Gen Z aren't drinking a ton, but millennials still are, which is I imagine you and I'm at the tippity top of millennials. I'm barely a millennial type of thing. But they're just like wine don't even seem to be trying. It's weird to me, to be honest. Like why not even like it's like do you want to survive? Like what do you think's gonna happen? Like when all the fucking boomers die, bro? Like who's gonna buy your shit? Like if yeah, I don't know. So wine is a whole different industry and stuff. So I think the beer has a while to go before it's as bad as where wine is. That's a different conversation, I think.
Yeah, in the States, surprisingly, it's not. It's actually evening out. So
Really? That's
I
good.
interviewed one. Well, I interviewed one winery, and I've reached out to more of them, and not surprisingly, maybe surprisingly, they're less likely to talk about it. Maybe because there's more money, maybe because they're successful in other ways. I don't know, but no one seems to want to talk to me. But I did talk to one kind of urban winery. It was called the monkey one. Now I can't think of it, but and so during that interview, or before that interview, I did the research, not as much as I did for yours, but research.
Mm.
And wineries went in the States during the time beer expanded from, 3,000 breweries to 10,000. Wine went from 9,000 to almost 12,000, which is still a shitload. But now there's like 12,000 wineries and only, 10,000 breweries. The gap is way closer.
Mm.
And again, what we know from all the macro numbers you see, ethanol production in the United States has stayed pretty consistent, and the new crop of folks aren't really getting into it. And so it looks very bleak having that many outlets on all three tiers because spirits also grew. But
Mm. It's going to be an interesting future, man. Like it's a little concerning for
I'm glad I
everybody
sell land
involved.
because they don't make more land, so it's one
They
advantage.
don't make more land. You're in the right business, my guy. Like, if swear to God, if we weren't doing this, the only other business that makes sense is real estate. And I'm not a salesperson at all, but real estate kind of sells itself. You just got to not be a dickhead and just be kind of smart about it. And I feel like you can do a good job. Obviously, you're out here killing it because you're a salesman and you know what's going on, and you're obviously ran a business enough, even if maybe it didn't work out. But 10 years running a business and didn't close down. I don't know. I think that's still something to be celebrated. I think that's really dope. I got a lot of respect for that as well, particularly in a business like beer that when you got into it, it wasn't cool, it wasn't popping at all, and then things became cool and popping later on. Um, you know, and you decided to exit at a good time. It seems like so. And now you're
Yeah.
analyzing it. I don't know. I like everything you're doing with this, man. It just makes a lot of sense.
Well, it'll be interesting to see too that we not only do we not learn much about ourselves from success, I think but I don't think it makes us better people in general. But my failure, I would venture to get maybe when you were younger we might have whatever, but the person I was when I started this in this industry was not necessarily the nicest guy. So I left my first company, made seven figures, doing well, riding high. It's kind of a dick, and I don't know. I think the failure made me a better person at the end of the day. Maybe not a great person, but a better person. So.
Hey, man. Well, I don't know. I've only had a good experience with you personally, so I see that. But I like that humility, and I like the self honesty and the self reflection. I think that's a really admirable trait because you got to look at yourself. So it's hard to look at yourself and just be like, I'm fucking up here, here, and here. And if you're able to do that and to know that like you came off a big win with some confidence, which is probably deserved because it's not like having 8 fitness centers was a guaranteed win. You could have fucked that up, but you didn't, and you made it work. And then you exited, and you did good, and you came out with some guap, and you're like, hell yeah, bitch, I killed this shit. And you're like, there, let me get into some fucking beer. I'm gonna kill that too.
That's
You know,
pretty accurate.
yeah. And they're like, but I'm not like, can you blame somebody for doing that, for growing a business and exiting 7 figures? I mean, that's not an easy task, and you feel great about yourself. And there's not many probably people around you that are doing like that. And then you get into something like beer, and you're like, whoa, this is a little rough. This is different. And that humility, then but you've been successful before, so you're able to parlay that into the success in real estate, and then now be able to analyze the failure, and you're taking sort of that the negative side of what happened, and then you're turning that into a complete positive by analyzing multiple, hopefully 100 different people's failures, and then being like, these are the things that made people fail. If you avoid that, you're probably going to succeed. So really, that's a positive at the end of the day. And then you've made yourself a better person. So I don't know. I see all dubs on your side, my bro. Like, I don't see any L's at all. Ain't
I
nothing wrong.
appreciate that.
I know. I think it's cool. I just think it's really dope what you're doing. I just think it's like really valuable, and the fact that you even took the time to listen to that episode, and then we analyzed that to see like some of the things that Barncat, rest in peace. That it's a real, genuine, true shame, and maybe these guys just had enough, and maybe they did it intentionally, not unknowingly. Like subconsciously, they were like, what's the word when you fucking ruin your own shit? What's that called? I'm having a blank because we've been drinking.
Like self-sabotage.
Self-sabotage. Thank you. Yeah, self-sabotage. Like the maybe just being like, oh, I'm just gonna make barley wines and stouts, and I know they're not gonna make crazy money, and fuck it, I don't care. It could have been a bunch of that. Maybe they just had enough. They might have just had enough and just happy to wrap it up, and they went out on a high. Everyone was loving their stuff, and I went and bought as much of their, because I found myself guilty of that. I wasn't buying as much of their stuff as I would normally have because it wasn't new all the time because I had it before. And I was like, it'll be around. Then all of a sudden when it wasn't, I was like, oh no, I gotta get on this shit. And it's kind of how it goes, right? You don't appreciate what you got till it's gone, type of thing.
Well, there's probably also 5x the number of breweries from the first time you tried it. So at some point too, you've only got so much beer you can put in your face. And you're a professional, you can put a lot, but there's a limit.
But I'm traveling too, right? So I'm getting shit from everywhere. So everything's an opportunity cost. Like, I've still got beers from New England, which was 3 weeks ago when we got back, and I want to drink them before they die. So I can't justify buying new beer from here right now because I have to finish all of that stuff, and I still have a pretty significant volume to go, and I don't want it to get too much older. So I just gotta fucking plow through what I have in as fast as possible to just get enjoy it as fresh as I can get it. It's a whole thing. I'm just trying to try as much stuff from as many different places as possible. And then I wish haze just didn't last 4 weeks tops. God damn it, it's so annoying because then you just miss out on the thing and on the freshness of it. But anyway, this is good, man. I feel like we're coming up on 3 hours. I knew this was going to be a long one, but a great one. I feel like we've gone over a lot tonight. We've really covered sort of your history and sort of a lot of the different areas where, maybe you saw that you went wrong and then people around you went wrong and some of the breweries did right too. Some of the ones that we drank tonight were doing great. It's like the one that you had. What was the brewery you had first? The one with the winery and the...
Yokefellow.
YOLK?
Like yoke around your neck?
Yeah, fellow.
Yeah. YOKE.
Sick. YOKE, I'm sorry. Okay. I love that. I'm definitely going to look out for them. That is super cool. Treehouse and Godspeed and Hair of the Dog, who rest in peace as well, and Barncat, rest in peace. I feel like we really covered a decent amount of and obviously Russian River. We've covered a decent amount of breweries that are in different stages of their success and otherwise, and also doing that. So your podcast, How Not to Start a Damn Brewery, is available everywhere. If you are a brewery or if you're listening and you know a brewery who maybe should be on it, now, what are the type of breweries that you're looking for? If anyone is a potential guest, who are you looking for? Because aside from Barncat, who I'd love to get you in touch with, but now I'm like, how do I get in touch with them? I don't know how to. I have emails, but do the emails work anymore? I don't know.
I did send them an email. I don't know what. I think only a couple of days ago, but yeah.
It might be worth DMing them on Instagram, but there's another brewery in Toronto I know, which I could probably say because they're gone, called People's Pint, that went out of business, I believe, earlier this year or last year, and he was proactively saying, do not get, he's aggressive on your side, as in, do not get into the beer business. It's fucking pointless. I have him personally on Facebook, so I can message him if you want, People's Pint, which I can talk to you off air about as well. That might be worth talking about because seems to be pretty aggressively against the beer industry right now because he knows how rough it is. So that might be a good cat to talk to from Toronto.
That'd be fantastic because normally I'm that guy and I would probably be in the middle compared to him. So it'd be interesting to have a conversation with somebody like that.
Yeah, I've seen some of the stuff he said to other people, and I was like, oh, this dude is just not having it at all. So that could be a good one. So let's talk about that off air, and I can either reach out to him on your behalf or find out his email. But if there's anyone who you would want to speak to, and if anyone's listening right now, what's the archetype of the guest you would like to speak to on your podcast, so we can get you to that 100 goal, 100 episode goal, so then you can write this book that everybody can benefit from?
So there's a lot of stories that'll help. I think I told you, I try to have only one successful brewery per season, but I definitely, one thing I don't have, and there's a couple I've reached out to, is I don't have a brewery who went into liquidation, came out of it, and then continued. And so that would be an interesting story. What did you do differently? And then another one that I've reached out to that I haven't been able to get is a brewery that closed down because it wasn't working, and then a brewery that opened up in the same spot and it is working, to interview both of them together and figure out what brewery B is doing better than brewery A and how it's turned around. And obviously there's some verification needs to go with that. But then at this point, if a brewery's closed down, I definitely want to have a conversation, and then we can walk through it. And if it's relevant and good for both of us, then going forward, I'd love to at least talk. So
that's amazing. Where can they reach out to if they wanted to get in touch with you? What's the best way?
Email or phone. Email is the easiest one to remember. It's just 3 words, freeplaykelly@gmail.com. And then if you want to write down my number, 830-481-7092. Happy to take phone calls. So.
That's awesome. So reach out if there's anything. If I think of people, I'm going to tell you about it, but I'll give you some details that I have from anybody, from at least those two, from Barncat and from People's Pint, because I have a feeling he, at the very least, because he didn't seem happy about the way it all went down, he might be interested in chatting. There's another brewery here called Rhythm and Brews in Kitchener, Ontario, which is not too far from here, that closed down not too long ago. Like, I'm talking within the last month. They might be interested. You might be able to get them on Instagram too. So I'm going to give you all those names off air, just maybe a few little leads that could be helpful. And like, that sucks that I can think of those so many already off the top of my head. That's probably a sign of the times that we're in, that, like, you know, things are a little rough. But I think like the bright side is that they could talk to someone like you, Kelly, and be able to, you know, you're going to ask intelligent questions from someone who has shared their position and trying to analyze the thing, and not to make anyone feel bad about any of their things because you're in their exact position. And just to try to, like, the ultimate goal is to really share the learnings from this, so that, you know, current brewery owners and potential brewery owners could know what to avoid. And sort of, like, you know, some of the pitfalls. And I just think that that's just a great thing to have in the zeitgeist that the people can just have access to. And I think it's really admirable that you're doing that and taking the time, you know, as a serial entrepreneur like yourself, man. You know, any dubs and L's, it doesn't matter. It's all part of the story, and it's all a beautiful thing. So I think you're a champion, man. I appreciate you, and I'm very glad that Kevin put us in touch. This has been really fun.
I appreciate letting me share the story, and I had a great time tonight. So anytime I can come help, let me know.
Man, we're gonna definitely do this again. I feel like you know, usually every like 12 to 18 months we touch base with someone, but basically now we're in touch. If you're like, hey, we have a development and you want to do it, let's fucking just hang out, pick some beers, we'll do it again, because this is a very easy conversation, and I just think it's valuable. And I feel like this has been one of the realest conversations that we've had here, as far as, I feel like I'm typically skewing towards the maybe more optimistic side of things, but we got to be real with the world we're living in, and, you know, things are a little rough, and, you know, let's talk about the issues, the things that the breweries and companies and individuals may be having, and you know, we're not just dwelling on the issues. Oh man, this is all fun. We're like, yeah, how can we get around it? You know, what's the solutions? Because that's what we were sort of, you know, looking through the transcript and the notes that you had on Barncat, like, what could they have potentially done better? And you pointed out a number of things. You know, why didn't you open the tap room, and why did you continue to produce styles that weren't really the biggest sellers? You know, in a time when things were a little rough, things like that. So I think this is valuable. More than happy to have you on any time, man. So let's definitely keep in touch. I'm glad we're connected. I want to take a screenshot of the thumbnail. Do you want to hold up some of the cans and or bottles that you got there? I know, I think you had all bottles actually.
I did. Strangely, because I'm surprised that Yokefellow had a bottle.
Yeah, like, I like it. I like the... Oh, shit, whoops. I already took the screenshot. That was a silly one, wasn't it? Let's do that again. There we go. I don't know what happened. It's knocked all three beers back. This, I think it's Treehouse. It was like 8.5. It was a little rough. All right, you ready? Boom. Stick around. I'm just going to wrap this up, and we'll finish up off air. But Kelly, where can everybody find you online, my man?
So Damn Brewery is the easiest. If you go Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all those, it's gonna be Damn Brewery. And then yeah, if you Google how not to start a damn brewery, you're gonna find a bunch of different places we are. So
that's amazing. Is Damn Brewery on Instagram?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm gonna get you now. I don't know if I didn't have you on there. That's ridiculous. Damn.
Actually, no. Instagram might be how not to start a damn brewery. I think
there it
get
is
it on that one.
Oh, I got you.
Some asshole took it, and I reached out to him. I forgot about that.
I got you here. Yeah, I see you following. I wasn't following you back. I apologize. I got you now, though. How not to start a damn brewery on Instagram. So make sure you check that and you Google it. Basically, I just Googled earlier today and I found everything. There's a bunch of great episodes everywhere. Apple Podcasts, everything. I mean, you've got You got People's Beer, which is interesting because I've had them on the podcast too, which I thought was super cool. You got Aaron Gore, who's actually coming up again soon from Bavana, formerly known as Community Ventures Brewing, or CBV, Community Brewing Ventures, something like that used to be called. You got the Aussie one coming up you're telling us about with Hendo. You've had some really interesting stuff on here, so it's definitely worth it particularly if you're a brewery owner and you just want to, see what you could avoid. And maybe there's some, you got Steam Whistle from here in Canada as well, which is perfect because they're one of your success stories, I imagine, because they're killing it. You got Uncle Kevin from Barrel of Monks, who's a fucking champion, another success story. He's doing great. So it's available everywhere. So make sure you guys check it out. Guys, thank you so much for watching and listening. If you enjoyed did I tell you? Oh, you already said where to follow. I'm drunk. I don't care. Guys, thank you for watching and listening. If you enjoyed the episode, smash the thumbs up, hit subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you know when the new drills. Follow us everywhere at BAOS Podcast. Check out the long form audio so you can hear attractive gentlemen, Texan gentlemen like Uncle Kelly talk about craft beer. Mate, this has been a beaut. We'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.
Cheers, man.